Boulder, City of Boulder Planning Board for September 5th, 2019. We have a quorum. The first order on the agenda is the approval of minutes. We don't have any minutes, so we're going to go beyond that to public participation. Before I go any further, I'd just like to point out that for those who would like to have translation into Spanish, Marina Lagrave is here, and she's sitting on my left, your right side of the room, and she has translation devices that she can provide for you if you need them or would like them. Next order is public participation. Public participation is for people in the public who would like to come up and speak to the planning board about any item that is not on the agenda tonight. So if you want to speak to the Ponderosa Mobile Home Park item, you will speak after the presentations for Ponderosa Mobile Park. If you want to speak about something that is not on our agenda tonight and Ponderosa is the only public item for tonight, then you can go see Cindy and you can get on the list for people who want to speak tonight. Is there anybody on the, no? Does any member of the public want to speak simply at the public participation section? Okay, then we can move on. The next item is discussion of dispositions, planning board call-ups and continuations. We have 5 call-up items. 3 are floodplain development permits and 2 are subdivisions. Does anybody have any questions on planning board as to any of those items, or would anybody like to call any of those items up? Okay, looks like we could move on from there to our public hearing for the night. That went really fast. I'm going to turn it over to staff. Ready or not, here we come.
That's the flood test.
Great. Thanks very much. Good evening, board members. As many of you know, the city purchased the Ponderosa mobile home property in 2017 with the intent to protect the health, life safety of the Ponderosa community while enabling permanent housing affordability, to promote sustainability and ensure minimal displacement of the residents that live there. So over the past 2 years, there's been a tremendous amount of outreach and partnering with the community that's culminated in the plan that's before you this evening. So I'm going to turn it over to Sloan Walbert, Senior Planner, to take you through the staff analysis.
All right, well, thank you, Charles, and good evening, board members. So tonight's presentation is for the proposal for the annexation of the property and the phased installation of infrastructure and construction of fixed foundation homes on the property. As Charles described, the goal is non-displacement of existing residents, and mobile homes would remain in the development for the foreseeable future. So for tonight's discussion, I will present the context, both in the built environment and also the regulatory context, a summary of the project, and then I will present findings on key issues. In terms of review processes, the property requires annexation to be brought into the city limits and to allow for upgrades and repairs to the existing utility connections. Planning board is required to make a recommendation to City Council whether or not the annexation should be approved and the terms, conditions, and zoning that should be applied. A land use designation change to medium density residential is necessary to permit the proposed construction of fixed foundation homes on the property. And this process requires approval by the planning board and city council. There is no Boulder County call-up since the site is an enclave. And lastly, the project is required to complete a site review because the site exceeds the minimum thresholds for the proposed RM2 zoning. So the staff memo had a detailed description of the city involvement with the site. The city was awarded a community development block grant and purchased the property in 2017. Also in 2017, City Council adopted the Ponderosa resolution, which Charles described. And since the purchase, city staff, working with consultants, has been working with residents to envision the future for the community, which is referred to as the Ponderosa Community Stabilization Project. And a concept plan for the proposal was submitted and reviewed by Planning Board and City Council in 2018. So this graphic represents the project schedule. If approved, the project would move into technical document review, after which permits could be submitted and issued for infrastructure improvements and new homes. So since purchase of Ponderosa, there has been extensive community engagement and outreach undertaken by the city and consultants, both to inform residents and also gather input from residents and the neighborhood, which includes resident workshops, one-on-one meetings, neighborhood meetings, and various publications. And as part of the public process, written notice was sent for the proposal tonight, and notice was posted on the property. So the property is under the jurisdiction of Boulder County and is considered an enclave to the city because the property is surrounded by Boulder city limits on all sides. The property is located in Area 2 in the comprehensive plan and is eligible for annexation. In fact, per annexation policies, the city will actively pursue annexation of county enclaves. The majority of the site is designated as manufactured housing on the land use map of the comp plan, which applies to existing manufactured housing parks. This designation is intended to preserve the affordable housing provided by these parks. Additionally, the northern edge of the property is designated as open space other, which is intended to cover the riparian area of 4 Mile Canyon Creek. The proposal includes a land use map change to medium density residential, which is characterized by a mix of housing types from single family to attached units, which are generally situated near neighborhood or community shopping areas or along some of the major arterials of the city. The existing county zoning is manufactured home park. However, city zoning of manufactured housing would be inconsistent since the new homes would be built on fixed foundations. So the proposed zoning is residential medium 2, which is defined in the land use code as medium density residential areas primarily used for small lot residential development, including duplexes, triplexes, et cetera, where each unit generally has direct access at the ground level. The property is located within the boundaries of the North Boulder Subcommunity Plan and is within the Union Utica neighborhood defined by the plan and is subject to specific design guidelines. 4 Mile Canyon Creek runs along the north property line. The site is impacted by the 100-year and 500-year floodplains. There's also a strip of high hazard and conveyance zone along the north property line. 4 Mile Canyon Creek is contained within land owned by the city as open space, and any future home replacements on the property and within the 100-year floodplain would be required to be elevated and meet any floodproofing standards required by FEMA. And it's also important to note that all of the finished floors of the existing mobile homes are located above the flood elevation currently. So to give some context, the park operated on a well and septic system until the late 1970s. However, an out-of-city utility agreement was approved in 1978, which allowed the park to connect to city water and sewer systems. Based on the language contained in the out-of-city utility agreement, the property may perform continued maintenance of the existing utilities, but any upgrades or modifications require annexation into the city. The property currently has no stormwater detention or water quality controls, and internal access roads are unpaved. The park currently contains 68 households, 67 of which are manufactured homes, and 1 is a part of the manager's quarters. The site currently has access from both Cherry Avenue and Broadway. There's also a commercial structure located on the arm extending to Broadway, which is currently used as a carniceria. The site is located in North Boulder, west of Broadway. The surrounding area has evolved over the last 25 years, largely guided by the North Boulder Subcommunity Plan. The character of the area is eclectic. The Shining Mountain Waldorf School is located across Cherry Avenue to the south. Foothills Community Park is located to the west, which to the north is the Foothills Community, which contains permanently affordable housing managed by Boulder Housing Partners. The site is neighbored by the recent 1,000 Rosewood residential development to the west, which is neo-traditional in design. And aging industrial development neighbors the property to the south and to the east. So beyond the school and park, to the south and southeast of the site are established single-family residential neighborhoods. Again, the site is located adjacent to 4 Mile Canyon Creek. To the east across Broadway are the Uptown Broadway and Violet Crossing developments. And industrial uses are located to the north across the creek, which includes a self-storage facility. So the proposed development of the site would be phased over 10+ years to provide housing options to existing residents and to achieve the goals outlined in the Ponderosa resolution, namely the minimal displacement of residents. The layout of the internal streets and building locations are largely driven by the intent of the resolution to allow for gradual and voluntary mobile home replacement. So the site design proposes to retain the existing block system and north-south internal street connections. The first phase would install necessary utilities, including new water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater connections. And stormwater detention and water quality improvements will be installed where possible. Primary access to the site would be from Cherry Avenue and 10th Street with a new 4-way intersection with stop signs proposed. Secondary access would be provided via a road extension to Rosewood Avenue. The plans show the site access to Broadway as an emergency access only. The reason for that is that the final design for this portion of the site is unclear at this point due to approved flood improvements at the Broadway underpass, which were approved as part of the 4 Mile Canyon Creek Greenways Improvement Project. There are also transportation improvements on Broadway that were approved as part of the North Broadway Reconstruction Project. So the Broadway access will remain open until such time where it is required to be closed. Also part of the initial phase, new paved streets will be completed. And lastly, as part of, there's the Broadway access. Lastly, as part of the first phase, 12 new residential units are proposed along the west property line in space which is currently used as sort of informal grassland and overflow parking. And reduced setbacks have been requested in this area to allow these units. So as part of phase 1, these units consist of carriage houses above garages, single-story carriage homes, a duplex, and a triplex. The majority of the homes would be accessed by that existing alley constructed by the 1,000 Rosewood development. New homes are 1 and 2 stories in height, and floor plans and elevations have been provided for these units. The structures are neo-traditional in design with front porches and either pitched or shed-style roofs. Moving on to the next phase, the central blocks of the development would transition slowly. As I mentioned, mobile homes would remain in the development and would gradually and voluntarily be replaced by new, similar-sized fixed foundation homes. However, no new mobile homes would be permitted. As part of this phase, paved east-west roads and alleys will be constructed where possible, and also where space allows, pedestrian connections, pocket parks, landscape, sidewalks, parking areas, open spaces, and traffic calming will be installed. And I just wanted to note that development sites will become available once there is adequate fire separation between the existing mobile homes and any new construction, which is what this diagram is demonstrating. So the ultimate phase for the project would include all of the improvements that were not able to be installed because of conflicts with existing mobile homes. The hope is to construct these on a block-to-block basis to achieve efficiencies and also avoid disruptions to the existing residents. New homes will be wired for solar installation, and a community solar approach is proposed to distribute and share energy savings among the residents. The proposal includes common open space along the creek, including a common house, community gardens, parks, and connections to the creek. And as the central blocks are redeveloped, all of the east-west and north-south connections will be incorporated and completed, which includes a detached sidewalk along Cherry Avenue, also a north-south multimodal connection to connect the multi-use path to Cherry. At the ultimate phase, I'd also complete the pedestrian spines and any other pedestrian connections proposed. And at final build-out, the proposal is for 137 parking spaces, which would be provided as head-in parking along the streets, in parking lots, or within garages or carports. The plan also includes 144 bike parking spaces, 112 of which are long-term and would be located in storage spaces or in garages, and 32 short-term spaces which would be dispersed throughout the site. Eco passes are also proposed for the residents. In terms of architecture and building design, homes added after that initial first phase would continue the same design aesthetic. The applicant has submitted design guidelines for the single-family, duplex, triplex, and fourplex units on the interior of the site. The guidelines include unit typologies and options, paint color, siding, trim, roofing options, and describe exterior improvements, including a carport, a porch, or fencing options. The proposed building materials include lapboard siding in several configurations, and either metal standing seam or asphalt roofing. The common house is a little more playful in design with storefront windows, overhead glass doors, and a shed roof. And at completion, the site would have 73 permanently affordable residential units. The new homes are proposed primarily as single-family and duplex homes, but as I described, there are carriage houses, triplexes, fourplexes also. The new homes would contain 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. The intent is to allow for a mix of housing that can accommodate a variety of household configurations. A long-term land lease would allow residents to own their homes, and off-site prefabricated construction is anticipated. The plan is to ultimately transfer ownership to a partner in the form of an affordable housing nonprofit or a housing authority. However, the city will continue to own the land until the infrastructure construction is substantially complete. And Habitat for Humanity is the housing partner who will help construct the homes and assist with financing. In terms of uses, also, as I described, the community building is proposed to serve the residents of the development, and that retail use on the arm to Broadway would remain in perpetuity. So as described in the memo, staff identified 6 key issues for discussion. The first being consistency with the comprehensive plan. Staff finds the project consistent with the goals, objectives, and recommendations of the BVCP, particularly housing-related policies. The project includes opportunities for permanently affordable housing, which supports socioeconomic diversity and housing for a full range of households. The proposal meets the policies on annexation, compact development patterns, and preserving the eclectic nature of the community. Regarding the annexation, staff finds the annexation petition consistent with the statutes. In addition, the annexation is consistent with city policies. The annexation would preserve existing housing on the property and would provide significant community benefits, primarily in the form of permanently affordable housing. City services will be available to the property with annexation, and as I described, one of the purposes of annexation is to upgrade the existing service lines in the park. Moving on, staff finds that the land use map change is appropriate. Consistent with Appendix C of the comp plan, the proposal is consistent with the policies and overall intent of the comprehensive plan. It does not affect land use or growth projections or the availability of urban facilities or services. Also, the change to the OSO designated portion of the site has been reviewed by city staff, including open space and mountain parks. And staff supports the change because the property's OSO lands do not significantly support or provide any of the open space purposes that are described in the city charter. Also, the intent of the OSO space is currently being provided in city-owned land. And just to note that while county approval is not required for the land use map change, they were referred the proposal and have indicated support. Also, the proposed RM2 zoning is appropriate considering the proposed housing types and density. It is a logical extension of the existing zoning and is compatible with the area and the intent of the North Boulder Subcommunity Plan. Moving on to that plan, staff finds that the proposal is consistent with the goals and objectives of the plan, the development guidelines. The proposed medium-density residential development and architectural intent is appropriate in the context of the 1,000 Rosewood development in the North Boulder subcommunity. Housing was an anticipated use in this area by that plan. The development would provide affordable housing for a full range of incomes. It has easy access to public transit, bike, and ped connections, and open space. It also includes frequent and convenient connections for pedestrians and bicyclists. And the site plan does encourage walking, biking, and transit by providing those safe and convenient connections. Lastly, staff finds that the project does meet all applicable site review criteria. The project is compatible, contextual, well-scaled, and includes, again, high-quality housing. Staff finds that the general layout is appropriate given the objectives of the Ponderosa resolution. The proposal is compatible with the character of the neighborhood. The open space is appropriate for both passive and active users and would provide a relief to the density. The street system has been minimized for the development as much as possible, and staff finds that the amount of parking is appropriate given the population served by this development. So to wrap up, staff finds the proposal to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, state statutes, land use code, and site review criteria. Therefore, staff recommends that the board adopt the motions listed in the memo and shown on the screen. And we are happy to answer any questions. And I would also just note that we do have staff representatives from transportation, flood, and housing to answer any questions.
Thanks, Sloan.
Thanks.
Thank you, Charles. Does any member of planning board have a specific clarifying question or two they want to ask? Sarah?
So the city is both sides of this. You're both the applicant and the approver. I just wanted to make sure I was a little unclear on that.
That's correct. The housing division is functioning as the applicant.
Okay.
So this is a lot like when we heard the new project at the Boulder Reservoir, where the city was the reviewing authority and the Parks and Recreation Department was the applicant.
Thank you.
Hold on, I think John had raised his hand next. John?
Yeah. Thank you for that presentation. There were a couple points that I was wondering about. One is that in your verbal comments, at least, you said that this would result in a population with a wide range of incomes. But isn't the entire project is intended for affordable housing? So that would seem to me to limit the range of incomes that would be resident there.
Yeah, I mean, that probably is a good question for housing, but I think it would be permanently affordable, but that means to a range of incomes that are considered affordable.
Okay, well, maybe the relevant person can address that. The other aspect I was wondering about was more of a matter of principle, and that is there's a number of manufactured housing courts in town. And by virtue of this project, I'm wondering, does this imply that the city ultimately intends or wishes that all of the courts become housing of this type rather than continuing as the types of housing that they have now?
So Kurt Fernhaber, our housing director, is going to respond to that as part of his presentation.
Okay. Thanks.
Do you mind, sorry, do you mind putting the motions back up, the previous slide, so that we can kind of be reminded of what we're trying to accomplish tonight?
Okay, I think we can get to that when it's time. But in a nutshell, we have the authority as planning board to approve a land use map change. It's a two-body review where only city council and planning board have to approve a land use map change. We have to recommend to city council approval, denial, or approval with conditions of the annexation, because annexation is a legislative act that only the city council can take, so we're only a recommendatory authority for that. And we are the authority that approves site reviews, so we will make a approval or denial or approval with conditions on the site review. Okay? David?
Sorry, could we go back to the land use map real quick? So my question on that is that the arm going over to Broadway, one more to the land use, I think.
The beginning.
That one, oh, yeah, that one. Oop. There it is. Okay, so the arm going over to Broadway, and there's a little box under it that are MH. I wonder if we looked, because I know that we brought that up in the concept review, whether MUB or something like what's below it would be good for that little box, which actually isn't in the site, and as well as the arm going down. And I wonder if there was any thought put into just kind of correct, or it would be kind of almost a correction, because especially the box under the site is already a little bit out of alignment with the zoning.
Sure. So in terms of the adjacent site, I don't think we'd be able to do that sort of cleanup through this proposal, but that's something that could be looked at through the next comp plan update.
Okay.
And then regarding that arm to Broadway, we did look at what could be done there if we changed the zoning or land use designation to be something else. But given those flood and transportation improvements I described, it's really unclear whether anything would be able to be done on that arm.
Okay.
So we thought it would just be appropriate to continue the medium density.
So it's cleaner just to do one designation in the whole site? Okay. I think that's fine. Thank you.
More questions, John?
Yeah. So did the Open Space Board explicitly approve that change to OSO land that is being proposed here? Or how has that been addressed by the open space folks?
So as far as I know, it was just reviewed by staff against the purposes and intent of the city charter.
Right, and the Open Space Board wouldn't have jurisdiction or authority over a rezoning or land use map change. That's the planning board's purview.
But was their input sought?
There was input sought from from the Open Space Mountain Park staff, but not the Open Space Board.
Thank you.
Sarah?
So just as a clarifying, I have a whole bunch of questions, but this may not be the right time. So I want to make sure that when we do go to our discussion. So the one clarifying question that I have that's very specific, could you please give us the breakdown of actual single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes? I could not actually add them all together, and it'd be very helpful.
Yeah, so that's unclear at this point because it will be really resident-driven. If they prefer a detached single-family home, that's an option. If they prefer a duplex, single-story, 2 stories, that's all an option. So we don't know at this point exactly what the mix will be at the final phase.
So it could be 70, 72, 3 units, or it could be 55. I mean, it could all be single, just so I'm trying to understand what the actual level of flexibility is, or.
Right. I think the applicant could probably describe that. My understanding is that it's designed to accommodate 73, but it's possible that it could accommodate less if everyone chooses detached single-family. There are certain units that will definitely be a triplex or a fourplex based on the site plans, but on the interior of the site, it's really unclear at this point.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
There, you can cheat on S1.
S1. Oh, see, I need my glasses for that.
Peter's microphone was off. What he said is that there's a breakdown on sheet S1.
These,
I think.
Yeah.
Thank you, Harvard.
Light. I think I can. So I have a question with regards to the choice of zoning it as a MR1 as opposed to an MR2, or rather MR2 instead of an MR1, because I think Rosewood is assigned as an MR1, and I just would like to know what the reasoning was for not going with the same, or, is there some specific reason why you wanted to maybe give more flexibility? I don't know what the reasoning was. I would like to hear.
Sure. So it is one of the key issues. One of the main reasons is that RM2 has more allowances for a variety of residential units as opposed to the other two medium density districts. Also, we felt like the intensity controls, which are based on a minimum lot area versus a minimum open space, was more appropriate for this development.
John, do you have a follow-up?
So as a follow-up, was this explained, or was this final decision done in concert with the community? Did they kind of come up with a resolution that this was the best thing that they could, or that they prefer?
Well, I think there was a lot of community engagement in what the vision was in terms of housing types and options for the future, and I think we backed into the zoning that would be most appropriate to allow that.
All right, so it was an input from the community saying this probably will give us the most flexibility, or?
Yeah, and I think the applicant could probably respond to that as well.
Okay.
John?
Yeah, I'm interested in the parking arrangements on this. How does this correspond to the parking arrangements associated with other projects of this nature in town?
I guess I would say I don't think there is another good analog in the city. We did look at the Palo Park affordable housing development, and that was another one where it was determined that a parking reduction would not be appropriate, and we sort of use that same rationale in this case, but I don't think we have a good analog for something like this where it's the site design is being driven by what is existing and also allowing for that gradual replacement.
Right, and this site probably has more surface parking than you would see in a typical neighborhood development, and more head-in parking than I think you would typically see. And I think, to Sloan's point, one of the things that's driving that is having to work around, kind of one-by-one replacement of these blocks. But also we're dealing with street sections that aren't really typical complete streets. There's been a balance here to try to figure out how can we get slow speed streets, that people can traverse by foot and still have enough parking for the residents. And, while one of the things we heard from the residents is that additional parking is helpful for things like work trucks and additional vehicles. So there was a bit of a balance there in the site planning.
Just to follow up, I understand that everybody wants more parking near their house and so on. I'm trying to get a feel of how this, the parking here per habitation unit compares to other neighborhoods in the city.
So it is slightly more than the requirement, and the goal was to provide 2 spaces per unit. And I think housing could probably address why they came to that conclusion.
Thank you.
Peter?
The reference to off-site modular construction, you used a word that was going to be considered, which I'm not certain how firm that word is. Can you talk more about that?
Housing can address that as well.
Thank you. I'm done.
Sorry.
Sarah?
Just another, I think this is a clarification question. In the proposal, you talk about, or what is written is, including a Boulder Valley Comp Plan land use map change to medium-density residential and an initial rezoning of RM2. That word initial really caught my attention. So can you
Right.
unpack that a little bit?
So that is the terminology that's used when a site is annexed. We call it the initial zoning. It will be the city designation. It's just the initial zoning that we are assigning to the property.
So it doesn't open it up to rezoning 20 years from now?
Not without going through the process.
Okay. And then I'm going to have some questions about what are the implications of the rezoning and what are protections for the tenants, but that may be stuff Kurt will respond to. Okay, thank you.
David?
Yeah, I guess I'll ask this now. The Broadway access closure, I read the text and I listened to what you said, and I just want to clarify because I wasn't actually sure I understood completely. So I know that you said that it would be kept open for emergency access, and then we say that at some point there will be a closure, but that's not for emergency access, that's, when we say it's being kept open until it needs to be closed, does that mean for general use?
Yeah, I think it's for general use, but again, I don't think we know exactly what that configuration will be. And we do have staff here from transportation if you needed more details on that.
Okay. We can.
Want that now?
We might as well, are people interested in getting that now? That would be interesting because it sounds to me like we're talking about keeping it open for general access until some undetermined day, which is understandable, but I just want to confirm that. Thank you.
It's a capital project that's been approved, right?
Good evening. My name is Garrett Slater. I'm the Principal Transportation Engineer for the city's Transportation Division. And so the reason I'm here is I coordinate the activities of the Transportation Capital Projects Group. And so we have the North Broadway Reconstruction Project, which the purpose of that project is to reconstruct Broadway between Violet and Highway 36. And as a part of that capital improvement project, we'll be looking to incorporate some enhancements to the 4 Mile Canyon Creek crossing. And one of those enhancements will entail looking at expanding the capacity of the existing box culvert, as well as reconfiguring the path alignment along 4 Mile Canyon Creek in the east-west direction. And as we look to fulfill the goals and objectives of the 4 Mile Canyon SEEP, and the thought of why are we doing those two efforts together is that it's highly disruptive to come into an area and tear it up with all kinds of construction and noise impacts. And so the thought is while we've got Broadway under construction, it makes a lot of sense to try to get this element of the 4 Mile Canyon Creek corridor in place while we've got the street construction underway. So we're going to do those together. And so in order to implement the goals and objectives as identified in the SEEP that's been approved by council, we'll need the space along North Broadway to put that capacity enhancement for flood mitigation in place. And we cannot maintain the access as it sits today, as well as provide that flood mitigation capacity enhancement. And so we'll need to take the space that's occupied by the driveway. And so right now we've got construction for the overall project slated to start in the middle of 2020. You might have heard that recently we went through a pretty robust public engagement effort, and the design for North Broadway was endorsed by TAB just last month. And so we're looking at updating the final design package for that project and looking to get that final in the first quarter of 2020, and then try to get that advertised for bidders and construction in the second quarter. So that means in 2020, we'll be looking to get work on the street as well as the structure. And so I would say we'll be looking at transitioning the access configuration sometime in mid to third quarter of 2020. So recognizing that that's an impact, the project, the North Broadway project, will be implementing temporary 10th and Cherry access improvements for the Ponderosa Park neighborhood. And so those won't be the full scale enhancements and improvements that have been identified in the plan, but we'll be looking to implement some temporary measures to provide an access point, recognizing that will, the access on North Broadway will be closed in 2020. So.
Okay. Would you, and that includes for emergency uses after that?
Right. So the permanent configuration on Broadway would mean that we would be able to provide provision for an emergency vehicle access from North Broadway. So we'll maintain a 12-foot wide path from Broadway into Ponderosa, and it will have a gate for which the emergency vehicles will have a key to access in and out.
Okay. That's what I was kind of trying to figure out. Okay, so that will exist after the transportation project in 2020 is behind us?
Correct.
Okay.
So Garrett, is there any thought about an extension of Ponderosa Avenue or Ponderosa Court, which is the easternmost street as you have it marked, crossing over 4 Mile Canyon Creek and connecting to Rosewood Avenue so that there would eventually be a direct connection to Broadway?
So that is a planning element that our North Broadway project is not addressing, and I'll defer back to the planning staff to comment on that.
Yeah, it's not a connection that's considered through the North Boulder Subcommunity Plan, so we'd probably have to go back to how that was originally synthesized.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Last questions?
Just one. I realize that some of the concern is specific to being able to access Broadway, but if another concern is in the short term being able to have more than one egress driveway, is the Rosewood Lane already connected to up there in the northwest corner? Is that already connected to Rosewood Avenue and the other development? And if it's not, could that be something that is set up?
So it is not currently constructed as it's shown, but it is proposed as part of that first phase of development.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Garrett.
Oh, Lupita, last question, maybe?
Yeah. So I'm just been trying to picture in my mind, sure, something catastrophic happened. Will we have enough exits for quick removal of people, vehicles, properties? I know one of the things that I know about this area is that whenever I go to this community, I always go in through Broadway. So when I saw that it's going to be closed, I've been thinking, what will be the other option? And if this is going to be permanently closed, can we be more creative in terms of having additional entrances and access to this area? So if that hasn't been worked out, maybe there will be a good thing to look. Because I still don't understand, because I haven't seen the plans with regards to the flood remediation that you're going to be doing, that we're remove this entrance. There's no possibility whatsoever that can become not just an emergency exit, but with that emergency, it seems more like entrance for emergency vehicles. So for the community themselves, for the residents, there's no way that there's something that can be provided for them? Or could that discussion continue within the transportation group?
So you're saying for egress for the residents of Ponderosa, So I would think if there were some kind of event that required their evacuation, that emergency personnel would be on site, and if they saw it in their purview to have residents use that as an exit, that they would have the gate pulled down and they would be able to make that decision as needed.
So as in the discussions that you guys had within the group, that didn't seem to be a very high problem? That you didn't think that was something that was going to be needed very highly, so that your sense from the community hasn't been that it's been an urgent need to keep that open?
No, I would say that we've heard from a number of folks in the community that their preference would be for that access to remain open.
And that has been part of your deliberations with regards to the way that you're going in the future for the remediation for the floods?
Yes. Yes, yes. So we've given consideration to that. And so I would say the flood mitigation opportunity for 4 Mile Canyon Creek is a key consideration.
Yes.
Right, that we would want to be able to put those flood capacity enhancements in place. And, but other considerations would be that city code says that we always desire to take residential access off the lowest street classification possible. And so the access to Broadway is an arterial, and it would be very unusual, and it states pretty clearly in the city code that we would always desire to have access off a local street, not off of an arterial. So that's a consideration.
Yeah, okay.
And
that helps me a lot, because now I know what the logic behind it is. So it's code-driven,
Yeah.
and that makes sense. So it's,
Yeah, and one more thing, Garrett. I think we had talked at concept review about the proximity of the arm to the existing Rosewood Avenue intersection being a little tight, or maybe too tight. Is that correct, too? I'm trying to fill in some gaps here.
Yeah, the improvements are going to push south, so I think that'll affect, the ability to have a driveway there. And to Board Member Montoya's point, one other consideration is that existing access today is actually in the high hazard conveyance zone. So it's kind of, if there were a flood event, it probably wouldn't be passable. So that was another consideration.
I'm sorry, that's what my concern was, that if they are going to address, the floods piece, and if they have to be a needed road there, I wondered if the plans should include from the very beginning that it be an exit as well as flood remediation. I don't know.
Okay. All right. Are we done with questions now? Okay. So before we go to the applicant, thank you, Garrett. Before we go to the applicant's presentation, I saw, Danica, I saw you, and I saw Kurt jotting down answers or little mnemonic devices for the questions that Planning Board asked that were kicked over to you by staff. And are you concerned that you won't be able to get through your 10-minute presentation if you answer those questions during the presentation? If so, you can just answer those questions now and then go into your presentation, or you can save the questions for after the
I
presentation.
think we'll try to do it through the presentation.
Okay.
And if we miss some, I'm quite certain you'll let us know.
Okay.
And then we can address them in the question period afterwards as
Okay.
well.
All right, well, Cindy, let's give them 10 minutes, and we'll see if they can bring it home.
Which do I push to
It
go
just
forward?
went offline, so let me, sorry. I'll note, though, that the Spanish translation of this presentation is available with Marina, so if anyone needs the Spanish written translation, it's available.
So while she's doing that, I'm going to start answering some of the questions.
Thanks.
So I'm Kurt Fernhauer, Director of Housing and Human Services. And as you mentioned earlier, we're the applicant. Danica Powell is a consultant that we've hired to help us through the annexation process. So the first one was around, are you ready? Cool.
My computer went to sleep. Should be, it's coming. There you go.
No?
No.
So the first one is the AMIs, which you asked about. It was mentioned that there'd be a range of AMIs. on the site. So we've done surveys of the residents. One of the things we've looked at is their incomes. There actually is a range of AMIs on the site currently, up into and including the middle income. And however, the majority of residents out there that live out there currently are, I would say, more in the 20 to 30 or 40% AMI range, but there is a range outside of that as well. Okay, so
There you go. It's not going.
no.
Here, I'm going to plug in a different computer. Sorry.
So the next one, the flexibility of the housing types. So what's really being presented in this proposal is the footprints of where future homes would go. We've created a housing typology that can come and go on certain footprints. So one footprint may have a single-story, one-bedroom. Within that same footprint, we can put a two-story, two- or three-bedroom. So that's where the flexibility really comes in. So hopefully now I'm on to the presentation. So the 5 top community hopes, values, and concerns.
Kurt, just to clarify, the flexibility is in the sizes, then we'll never have a situation where if every single person who's in the park today wants to move into a fixed foundation house, that, we'll have given up too many single-family sites and people will end up at the end not having a site for themselves.
So I think we're going to address that in the presentation.
ahead.
And if
I'll
we
wait.
don't,
Okay.
we'll get to it then.
Okay.
So these 5 areas actually came out of the community engagement, and they're quite important. And I think as we talk about the project, you'll see how these 5 areas come through and how we're trying to address them. But before I start, let me talk about the balancing that we're trying to do here on this site. We've had a huge amount of community engagement, so we're listening to the community. However, we're also balancing that with the city affordable housing goals that we would for any affordable development that we're working on. So we're trying to balance what we hear from the community with what we know we need to accomplish as a city. So we're actually looking at a design that's forward-thinking in a forward community as well. These homes are going to be around for 100 or 150 years, so we're trying to design for that future community as well. On the right is the resolution that City Council passed last year, which really was about a commitment that residents wouldn't be displaced through this process. We've had other forms of addressing this. However, in the annexation agreement, it also addresses this, and it gives that commitment, which really becomes a legal document that drives this. So one of the challenges is creating affordable homes. So we will be creating near net zero homes, so incredibly energy efficient. There's certainly increased cost to that. However, there's approaches to that. So I've got 2 slides on affordability. So the first is, through construction. With Habitat for Humanity, much of the labor is free. There's national programs that donate materials. And the sweat equity of the residents. This is really about a partnership between Habitat and the residents. So one of the developments within the last month has actually been a solar garden, which is going to be in place at the Boulder Reservoir that will support the Ponderosa residents, whether they're in a fixed foundation home or if they stay in their mobile home. The maintenance costs, we're addressing that through, you'll see in the annexation agreement, through a partnership with the city where they will be maintaining the streets and underground infrastructure. So there's also affordability through the financing. And you can see here that we're looking at serving residents from 20 to 150% of the area median income. Sloan mentioned the land ownership. That also creates additional affordability, both in the covenants and keeping it affordable, as well as not having to put that cost into the price of the home. Low-interest loans, so Habitat gets loans of like 1.5% to 2.5%, much lower than market. And the city has valued their current mobile homes and will be purchasing those homes for market value, which they can use as a down payment on their home, which also reduces the cost of the mortgage. And lastly, a silent second mortgage, which is a Habitat approach as well, where, as an example, a house may be $180,000 as the price, but they can only afford $120,000, so the mortgage is based on $120,000. That silent second would only be repaid at a future resale of the home. There will also be within that monthly payment, there'll be a community fee that will cover open green space, the exteriors of the buildings, painting and roofing. And the goal is for the lowest income residents to have a housing cost similar to what they currently have, which is, with maintenance and utilities, is between $750 and $800 per month. Other residents with higher incomes would have higher monthly payments as well, as similar to our other housing programs within the city. So on community engagement, so one of the first things that we did, and what the community did, is they elected a resident leadership committee. Their pictures are up there, and many of them are here this evening. And we've been meeting with them on a monthly and regular basis. We've had tours of Habitat homes. We have a resident guide. Every question that they ask us, we put into the resident guide. It's now really thick. And we keep updating that. There's been monthly newsletters to the community in both English and Spanish. We've had videos. One of them you saw the last time we were here. Some of them communicate better through text messages, so we've also done that. So we've also had community design workshops, which Danica will talk about a little bit. We've had a couple great block parties, also sponsored by the neighborhood liaison in the city. We've had 22 meetings with the leadership committee. And over the last month or a couple of weeks, and at times during any project, there's misinformation that goes on in the community. As a result of that, over the last 2 weeks, we've met with 20 different households over about 20 hours, and to answer specific questions that they may have. We also had a good neighbor meeting with the residents outside of Ponderosa. And I'm just going to look here quickly to see if there's any questions that I would want to address. The offsite construction. So we're looking right now at various sites within the city, and also looking at a potential partnership with the school district on land that either the city owns or that the school district would own, where we could do pre-manufacturing of the homes. That process isn't far enough along, and you may be hearing about it in front of you at some point as well. The parking, so the parking there is more parking on this site than we would normally see for the affordable housing project, and that's really based on what we heard from the residents, and also doing counts on the vehicles that they have. There's many residents that own their own business, they have work vehicles, and for them, the parking is actually, critical to their livelihood. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Danica Powell.
Great. Well, it's good to be here. I've been working on this project since 2014, and I just ran out of time. I'll go quickly.
How much time do you need, Danica?
6 minutes,
Okay.
5 minutes, 4 minutes.
Pleasure of the board?
No, I think we should hear.
Okay. Can you give her
I'll go
5 minutes now?
quickly. I didn't plan to take a long time, but thank you for having us. I'm with Trestle Strategy Group. There's also members from our architecture team, our engineers, and lots of folks here to answer all your questions from our team. So, and this is just a quick timeline. There's a lot of moving parts in this project, and so this housing program that we've been discussing has been concurrent with this planning process, of which we're now kind of culminating in these public hearings with you. We also put the Broadway Transportation Project on there. Our understanding is that will be closed next summer, so we have been preparing for that with the residents and talking to them about it and meeting with them on site to talk about what those changes will look like. So as you may remember, some of you were here last year when we had our concept planning. We did a site design workshop in 2018. We had a lot of residents participate, and we really discussed all the community values and ideas that we had wanted to see through previous engagement, and really did some exercises to see how those could fit on the site. There's 68 current homes, and so we had scaled homes, we had community amenities, roads, access points, utilities, and really trying to show how different groups could fit those together. So as you can see, these 4 kind of large groups of folks came up with very different designs, a lot of which, though, did incorporate the green space and attached homes, traffic calming measures, flood safety, and a lot of discussion around the access points, as I'm sure you'll hear more about tonight. We also did a lot of resilience planning and workshopping with the community to talk about values and hopes, amenities, and these were some of the types of the highest priority. And you can see transportation and parking very high on the list, as Kurt mentioned. We did do a survey of residents, and they're actually they're very large families, some extended families, and a lot of work vehicles. And so we really wanted to honor that those vehicles are very important. And so that's why the parking has been reflected the way it has. Sloan did a great job at phasing, so I'll just quickly run through this. 12 new units on the west end, most of which are single-family carriage homes, 1 triplex and 1 duplex. We have new wastewater and water service, including stormwater detention and water quality, of which there is none today. So this is really important for the health of the community and the neighbors downstream. We'll also be doing new roads, as we mentioned, and the 12 new units, fire hydrants and fire access, and a new park. So in phase 1, we're able to fit in one of the parks from the ultimate phase. After phase 1, the way we're describing it is it's choice-driven phasing. It's hard to explain exactly how this will go, but we put a lot of discussion into how things will be it phased in. This graphic, I believe it's in your packet. What it's showing in white is our new site layout. What you're seeing in gray is where there's an existing mobile home, and you're seeing in green where there is a vacant mobile home today, either through attrition. A couple people have moved out, and there's been actually some people who've passed away in this process, and so those homes people haven't replaced those homes, so this allows us to look in the future where we'll be able to start our progress in home replacement. We did just do a survey of which 98% of the residents participated, and so we found that 85% do desire to stay in the community through all of this change. 60% of those are interested in a Habitat home or a fixed foundation or new affordable home ownership. 22% are unsure, they need more information, which is really important that we keep providing that. And separate from that, 75% like the option that they can stay in their mobile home if the Habitat option doesn't work for them or isn't a good fit for their family. After this, we talk about this choice-driven phasing on a block-by-block approach. So our goal is to continue to work with the residents and understand where people are interested in moving into the first set of new homes on the west end, and then really minimizing disruption. And so the voluntary movement of folks is really important to our process and could take many years, as Sloan described. There's no phase 2 that we know, but that will emerge, and we'll do technical documents, tech docs with the city once we know we have an area to start working with. This is another diagram to just show how the new homes will be separated from fire separation. A lot of them don't meet fire separation standards now. Those homes will be allowed to continue to stay, but new homes will have to be separated. Lots of design around the private open space, the storage areas, and actually giving residents some design and allowing them to do their own porches, balconies, and decks. And this was a housing density study that we did early on and recently revisited, just looking at the existing conditions and density and housing size, and then looking at what we would, if we did just single-family homes with traditional lots, traditional setbacks, how many homes we could get on the whole property would be 25, which is really important. It's a very low density. And then our solution was doing this land lease with duplexes, single-family homes, and carriage homes to keep our density at the RM2 level. And so this was information that we share with the community. And I have lots more on community. I have 3 more slides on community benefit, but I think I'd rather answer your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you, I don't quite understand the long-term land lease economic or framework. Can you explain that to us or me?
So it's very similar to what exists out at Palo Park. So that land is owned by Boulder Housing Partners. So there's a land lease that it may be, $1 a year, for the entire property. So the land is held by BHP, and the residents have the ownership of the house above it.
Which is not unlike what they had with the mobile, the manufactured home.
Yeah. However, they're not paying a monthly rent to BHP to be on the land. It's also the same arrangement that exists at the Poplar project on Poplar Avenue. And that project has worked quite successfully in that way.
And would Habitat be, since they're the partners in building the housing and providing the mortgage support, would they be the owner of the land?
No. Habitat, once someone purchases a Habitat home, they own it just like anyone else owns a home in our community.
Okay.
Yep.
So who would own who is?
BHP would own the land.
It's going to be BHP.
BHP or another affordable provider, but
Right.
yes, like Thistle possibly as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Lupita?
I have a hard time figuring out when he's on. Okay. So with regards to the people that are already there, and it seems like the numbers are, a lot of people will rather stay as they are. Are there any requirements whatsoever for people that, I don't know how to phrase this. Are there any kind of requirement with regards to legal status to be able to own in this place in the future? Is there anything that people make misconstrued as obstacles for them to stay where they are? Because one of the things that I'm most concerned, it may be the miscommunication and people maybe worrying about they no longer qualified to be here, or it's not safe. You know where we live in right now. Yep. So if you can speak a little bit to that, because I think that will be very helpful for our communities to hear this.
Sure. So our approach from the beginning is to create a path to home ownership or a home for all residents at Ponderosa. So anyone who wouldn't have legal status would have an option to rent a home, a Habitat home. If someone in their family or household becomes a legal resident, that can happen through a child who turns 18, and we've met with most of those resident families in the community, and we believe there's a path for every household at Ponderosa.
John?
Yeah. You heard my earlier question about what the ultimate thinking is regarding manufactured homes elsewhere
Yes.
in the
Thank you.
city.
Yep.
Can you address that?
Yeah, so actually, thank you for bringing that up, because I wanted to make a similar point to that. So one of the challenges we had with this particular development project at the very beginning, it's a manufactured home community. However, it doesn't meet any of the standards, particularly around setbacks. Many of these, this community was built in the 1950s. It started off as a place for RVs. So it's a very tight site. It's tighter than any of our other parks in the community. So we couldn't even continue it as a mobile home community, because once you start bringing mobile homes in, they're larger in size today than they were back in the 1950s and 60s. And so we have a setback problem currently, and if you start bringing in larger homes, the density of the homes would go down significantly. So we really couldn't create a one-for-one replacement and maintain it as a manufactured home community. So to answer your question, the answer is no. Our intention isn't to have the same approach for other mobile home parks in the city, and the reason is because those parks were designed in such a way that they don't have those same types of restrictions.
So can I carry on? Thanks, I appreciate that. But if I understand correctly, despite the fact that this has a much higher density than any other mobile home park, ultimately, we're going to have even more residences here, you know, if the plans get carried out as being described now, than exist now.
Yeah.
So that the density will ultimately be even greater than in existing mobile home parks.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing is we'll actually be creating more open space as well. The two components that create that, one is connecting homes. You create more separation between homes when you do that. That's why, you know, there's duplexes and triplexes as well as single family. The other is that they're now two-story homes. So you may have a 900 square foot home now. Your footprint's going to be 600 square foot, and you're going to have a 1,200 square foot home.
Okay. And then another question, is there any time limit to the offer of Habitat for Humanity to assist residents in making these changes, like 5 years or 10 years? Or is this can they wait 35 years and expect to get the same assistance?
I don't want to speak for Habitat. I think the answer is probably yes. Habitat has been around since 1976, so they've already been around for longer than 35 years. I think they're a well-established organization throughout the country, and they've been in our community for 20 years. And I think the approach of this community is very different. If you look at any other mobile home community across the country, there's been one solution to redevelopment, and that's to scrape it and rebuild it. And that really hasn't been an option from the beginning because of this, we don't want to displace residents. So this community has grown organically, you know, over the last 45 years. We want this to be an organic process as well.
But so Habitat is willing to make that commitment for the indefinite future then? Is that what you're saying?
I'll let them answer that. I think Susan will be coming up here at some point this evening, and she'll be able to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
I have another question with regards to dates. And this is in regards to the Community Development Block Grant disaster recovery funds that you guys secure, as I understand it, specifically for this purpose. And my understanding is that you need to get construction going by September 2020. Yeah, 2020.
That's correct.
And so if that doesn't occur, that means that money goes away? Is that the situation?
I would have to get back to you on what would trigger that. I don't want to give a wrong answer on that. Someone from our funding team could answer that.
But these are critical funds to get the infrastructure in place.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
David?
Yeah, I was looking at the written statement, and I was reading through everything, of course, and then I just ran across a reference. I just want to make sure. It says in Phase 1, a new sidewalk will be installed, and it says along Ponderosa Court, which is actually on the east side.
Yeah.
And I think that should actually say along the Rosewood Lane. Isn't that where those new houses in Phase 1 will go? They're on the west side. Because Phase 1 is, I think, strictly those houses along the west side. So, it is page 34, and it's right under the figure 37, and it's the first sentence, so it should be pretty easy to find. But I just, it caught my attention because I just wanted to make sure I understood what was in Phase 1, and I was pretty sure that I understood it was just along the west side there.
I think it's on the west side of that street.
Oh, is it? So Ponderosa Court would be correct?
I don't know if you can throw a map up there or not. Want to address that?
I don't know that I'm the right person to do that. My computer's asleep.
That's good.
Okay, yeah.
Sloan has it.
So,
Oh, sorry.
it was in the written statement, page 34.
I'm going to get off here.
Yeah. So I think Ponderosa Court is the furthest
sure.
eastern thing.
That's
right?
correct, yep.
Yeah, and the sidewalk work wouldn't happen in Phase 1 there, would it? Or would it?
Rosewood Lane. I think it's a typo.
Okay.
Rosewood Lane would be the sidewalk.
And that's the one on the far west?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make
For reading that.
Yeah, because it was like, I wanted to make sure that I really understood Phase 1, so thanks for taking the time. Yeah, great.
Sarah?
So I have a couple more questions about the ownership issue. So maybe this is a Habitat for Humanity question, but one, how do you calculate or guarantee that current residents can afford what's being built? Like, how do you make sure that you're not building something that's beyond their means?
So I'll let Habitat answer that question.
Okay.
Yep.
So then maybe this is also a Habitat question. If someone chooses to hold on to their current manufactured home, what assets do they walk away with if they decide to move away?
So we did we hired an outside consultant who does valuations for mobile homes, and they did a valuation for each and every home and walked through each and every home, did an individual valuation for each one. That valuation increases in value October of every year. So by the, I think it's the value of CPI. And so if they moved out in, let's say, 10 years, that value would be, increasing over that 10-year period.
So no one walks away empty-handed?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
That's good to know.
I think the median value is 25,000 in that range, and it ranges from, I think, about 10 or 12,000 up to 50,000.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Lupita?
Question with regards to the community. Do you know what the average size of the households are in this place? And
I'll give you some general feedback because I don't have those numbers in front of me. We have a number of residents who are singles. We have a number of retired residents, and we also have a great number of families.
so it really is a spread.
It really is.
The mean is not going to tell us a lot.
It won't tell you much, no. And that's why we've got a huge variety of housing types as well.
Yeah, that now makes more sense for me because the one bedroom, I thought to me, how would you fit 5 people in there?
Sure.
So now it makes more sense.
Yep.
Thank you.
It's also, I would say it's also based on the needs that we hear from the community in general about housing types as well.
All right, thank you.
John?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand how a decision might be made to build a duplex or a triplex in those options. Would that require 2 or 3 neighboring homeowners to decide to cooperate to build one of those duplexes, for example, together?
No, I mean, I mean, they're basically a townhome type typology. And so when you buy a townhome, you don't get together first to figure out who you want your neighbors to be. You buy and sell townhomes on an individual basis. So they would apply for the homes that would be built in the future.
So, but you had said that everybody who's now in a manufactured home that might apply to Habitat to build a permanent home, that one of the options is to have duplexes or triplexes. But, so wouldn't that imply that neighbors have to agree that that's what they want, if they want to build those?
So this, again, this is the balance of building a community, or building a development for our larger community as well. We don't really have any affordable housing developments that we've done that require residents to decide if they're going to live next door to each other. Sure.
Well, I think the other thing, it's more about going back to that map where you saw where the future homes are and the existing homes and then the green homes. So as those green spots get larger, we then go, okay, we've got 8 homes that we can build, or we have 6, because we also want to build the infrastructure in a cohesive pattern, because ripping up, this much street or this much sidewalk is not going to be good for anybody. So we also want to wait until we have some economy. And so that will involve waiting until residents either indicate they want to move into a new home, of which we're building in the first phase. So we're hoping that 12 families that live somewhere in Ponderosa will move into those new homes, and then we'll look at that area that was vacated and find the development pattern.
I see. So,
As a more of a, like, there's an opportunity because it became available.
so you don't expect individual owners on a single lot?
People may not end up exactly where they were
I see.
in the park when this is done, because there will have to be some moving around.
Okay.
And they're, again, they don't own the land under them now, so the idea is that it's a community, so they can move to a different location.
Okay, thank you. And then just one other question for Kurt, and that is you described the range of incomes that exist now in the area. And you also mentioned affordability requirements. So would this be both low and middle income affordable? Is that what you're talking about?
That's correct, but there would certainly be a high majority of the units which would be built towards the lower incomes.
So who makes that decision then?
I think it's initially based on the needs of the community. So it's going to be based on what people can afford.
The existing residents.
The existing residents.
Yeah.
And then anything that's built after that, would be a more open process.
So do you have access to everybody's income, or?
We do through the.
How do you learn what they can afford?
Yes, we do through the survey that was done. But Habitat would meet with each family individually and do a whole financial analysis and coaching with them to understand what they can afford. And so the pricing would actually be based on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, is that it for questions? Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Cindy how many people we have signed up. And I think if we're going to need more than an hour for public comment, we'll take a break now.
We have 11.
Okay.
2 of those folks have pooled time
Okay.
for 5 minutes.
Okay, let's just keep going then.
Yes.
Okay, so we have 11 people signed up for public comment right now, and each person, unless you're pooling time, gets 3 minutes. When you have 30 seconds left, you're going to see the yellow light in front of you light up, and then you'll know it's time to start wrapping it up. I'm going to call 3 names at a time, and Cindy's also going to put the names up on the screens. If people whose names are called can come up to the front so we don't waste time waiting for people to come up to speak, that would be great. The first person who's signed up is Ed Zick.
Hi, I'm Ed Zick, and I'm a RLC member, Resident Leadership Committee. And I primarily deal with people on the third row, which is where the Cherry Street entrance exit that you guys want to open up, which is something that a lot of the residents, I wouldn't say a majority, but quite a few, on the third row there do not want that exit opened up for the reason being that makes that a main entrance exit, a main road, which our normal way is 28, going to Broadway, which has no houses on either side, whereas on our row, there's houses on both sides, they would face the street, and there's children all up and down that road. And they say, well, an alternative was they'll build play areas and all that. We're not taking in consideration the human nature of these children. If anyone's raised any kids, I've raised kids there, they go running out the front door, and there'll be a busy street there, busy paved street. So this is why I'm really do not want to see that Broadway exit shut down unless they come up with a definite better exit, which they talk about Rosewood. Open up Rosewood and get that going good before they even think about doing the Cherry Street entrance exit. And then there's also another issue, is my dear sister here, Karen, lives 2 doors down. We're at the very end of the third row, and they're talking about building a retention pond there, which would wipe her out. She would have to move. And what she said, she cannot afford to move anywhere in Boulder, which none of us can really. And, which is something I wanted to bring up. Right now, we are non-subsidized affordable housing. So we are existing without help from other people. And we like what we have. Karen has a beautiful, lovely place. I built mine from scratch. I don't want to lose it. And a Habitat home, there was no way I could afford the smallest place, which would even be less than a third of what I have right now. So this is pretty much the issues that I would say that I would ask that you really look into and consider before moving along with this to go ahead and annex. So
Thank you.
I wish you would take that to heart.
Thank you. Okay, and then we have Thomas Pickett and Harissa Poteet and Michael Gluck.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to thank you folks for allowing us to have our input and come up here and actually listen to what it is we residents want to do there. And I apologize to the people whose houses are in the way of the intersections or the progress. But is there an election coming up here pretty soon? Are we going to have we're going to be doing this all over again with new faces and no, this is it? Okay, good.
Not us.
We're not affected.
Okay, all right. Well, I just wanted to thank you because I hear all these horror stories of other places right here in Colorado, right here in America, where they do that. They scrape them off, kick everybody out, scrape them off, and then let the new people come in with their. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you folks because this is a wonderful opportunity to do something wonderful for our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Gentrification is a term for the arrival of
State your name
wealthy
for the record,
people.
please.
What?
State your name for the record. please.
Sharisa Poti.
Thank you.
In an existing neighborhood, gentrification
Before you
is a
go on, I'm sorry, you're pooling with Karen Campbell. Is
Yes.
she here?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, keep going.
Oh, can we start over, or?
I'll give you a little extra time
Okay.
if you go over.
Gentrification is a term for the arrival of the wealthiest people in an existing neighborhood, a related increase in rents and property values, and changes in the neighborhood's character and culture. The term is often used negatively, suggesting the displacement of poor communities by rich outsiders. In 1964, the term gentrification was coined by Ruth Glass of London. Scientifically, she studied human life and social life and stated, once the process of gentrification starts in a neighborhood, it goes on rapidly until all or most of the working class occupiers are displaced and the whole social character of the neighborhood is changed. What if a gentrification was about healing communities instead of displacing them? We already have 10 people that have moved out of the Ponderosa. Last month, while attending the City Council meeting, the Manufactured Home Strategy Action Plan was accepted. You can imagine my surprise. The plan wants to add mobile home parks to Boulder. Why are they trying to rezone our park? Although we have been involved in community engagement exercise and had no idea that Boulder City Council wants to make more trailer parks. The document talks about all the other trailer parks that are involved with feedback. Well, the Ponderosa is only mentioned as some kind of experiment. This is not an experiment, it's our neighborhood. Our trailers are all that we own in this Hollywood town. We receive very low buyout values for our trailers. Trailers are going for $60,000 to $90,000. In the current market, we no longer can sell and get the best price. The city is offering half the value. The buyout is lying on the backs of Boulder's most poorest residents. The home evaluation process is not fair. If you sell your home, the government is not there telling you how much it's worth or how much to sell it for. Yet this is what's happening here. My own experience was I have a workshop out back that has never been evaluated. The lady that was running the program, Pam, said that they would come back and check it out, and they never did. So I never had a chance to get more money or dispute my valuation. For my income, I can expect to pay $1,200 more than what I'm paying now if I get a Habitat for Humanity duplex. This does not seem like a good investment for me for low-income housing. I have worked sometimes 3 jobs to raise my children in Boulder. They are now in their mid-30s, and they take care of themselves. I would like a chance to retire someday, and I don't know how this will happen. If I am locked into a Habitat for Humanity rate for 30 years, could I still be working when I'm 85 years old? Paying a mortgage that's based on what I earn today? There are no opportunities for us to move out with the current housing crisis in Boulder for the amount of money offered for the city to buy the trailer. Everyone wonders why there's a homeless problem. Every time I come to this meeting, I pass homeless people out in the yard. I pass homeless people sitting on the benches. I wonder if you're solving the problem or not. The west side of the park is the most well-kept part of the park, and we need a buffer from the Rosewood neighborhood. 11 more residents will be added there. There's not enough room there. There are 12 trailers vacant, and we should start to build there. We received a letter from the City Council in February of 2018. The letter stated that the city states a total of 68 units. There's now a lot more on there. Home-for-home replacement was what was promised. Only 30% is single-family homes. We were told the city could also waive the community fee, and we have not heard anything of that. It's all over this documentation. And I also have a copy of a petition that we have 12 pages of signatures from Ponderosa residents, and we've submitted it to City Council and the mayor, and we'd like to submit it to you as well.
Okay, if you could hand that to Cindy. Thank you.
Harmon, can I just?
Yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me,
Teresa?
Ms. Potteet? Just if I can inquire, you heard earlier that people won't be required to move out of their trailer and build a habitat home in that location.
You know,
How does that affect your comments?
a lot of things have changed in this process. So a lot of residents are feeling insecure. They come by and say, oh, well, we have to move your trailer because of this development. So there's not a lot of assurance in that.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Michael Gluck. I've been in the Ponderosa Trailer Park for over 25 years. First was the flood. Then was the federal grant to Boulder City to buy the Ponderosa Mobile Home Park to improve the quality of life for the mobile home dwellers. Then someone somehow came up with the idea to replace all the low-income homes with middle-income housing. But very few homeowners can qualify for the Habitat for Humanity mortgages. And at that point, when they realized that very few people can qualify, they should have changed the plan right away instead of pushing ahead. So to keep one of the few mobile home parks in Boulder as a low-income option, I believe the planning board should shelve the Habitat housing plan as unworkable and just concentrate on improving the quality of life for those homeowners that remain as mobile home park living people, and to keep this real low-income housing option a reality. And by building houses on the west side of the park, that will just create more density and more traffic for no good reason. I have no idea why they want to build these houses on that little strip of land to the west of the park, rather than trees. And I think that area should be planted with trees and flowers, and it should be a buffer zone between the park and the other housing developments that are out there. There's already so much density, and then you're closing Broadway, and there's going to be so much traffic going down Rosewood that by the school that it's going to be a bottleneck. And it's absurd. I mean, they shouldn't build those houses on the west end at all. It's not necessary. Why are they doing it? I still haven't heard a good reason for them even building those houses. Anyway, that's about what I had to say.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Hi, my name is Kathy Slurth, and I've been a resident of Ponderosa Mobile Home Park for 20 years. When this all started, we started with our little group discussions clear back in 2016. And at that time, we all polled, and we all decided we wanted single-family homes, which the first designs all showed. Right up until January of this year, when the newest plans came back with only 6 single-family homes, the rest are duplexes and threeplexes and a fourplex. And we're told that this is the plan and this is the way it's going to be. There's no room for anything else. So we still have problems with the quality of what we were told we could get and what we were actually getting. then we have so many problems with people actually qualifying for these homes that a lot of people have left Ponderosa because they can't qualify. Excuse me. Then, moving out. Then when it comes to the closing the Broadway entrance, the bigger problem that nobody's looked at, by the way, nobody ever gave us notice that this was even going to happen for anybody to speak about it. But once they close that, and even if they open up the Cherry, an exit at Cherry and 10th through the mobile home park, there's still only one exit for Foothills, Rosewood, the Police Annex, and Ponderosa to get out. And that's there at Violet and Broadway. That's a safety hazard. What do we do in emergency? We're all stuck. There's also a question as, once we come into the city, why don't our mobile home prices grow in value? Why don't they double? Because the houses in Boulder are more expensive, and then we are in the county at this moment. Once they bring us in, there should be a boost that our homes are certainly worth more once we get into the city. So those are my comments. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bernardo Ramirez, then Carlos Valdez, and Victor Manuel Lemos Vargas, pooling with Jose Contreras, are our next three speakers.
Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I'm speaking for Bernarda. She's a little free to pass in the front with you guys. Perdón, voy a hablar en español. Está, bueno, está un poquito, no. Okay, I'm sorry.
So he's going to speak for Bernarda because she's shy. She doesn't want to come up and speak herself.
Solamente quería
But
darle.
he talked to her, she talked to him, and he's delivering the message.
Okay. Ella solamente quiere darle las gracias a toda la gente que está participando
She
en
wants
este
to thank
proyecto.
everybody participating in the project.
Está contenta con los proyectos,
She's
pero
happy
también
with the
está
project.
buscando más información para tener, pero ahorita se
But at the
expande un
time,
poquito.
she's pursuing to receive more information.
Pero ahorita no quiso pasar. Ya,
But right now, she didn't want to come forward.
ya, sorry.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Buenas noches.
Good evening.
Mi nombre es Carlos.
My name is Carlos.
Yo como parte de la comunidad latina estoy en
As
apoyo
a
de este
Latino member,
proyecto.
I'm in total support of this project.
Quiero darle las
I
gracias a
want
las
to
personas que
thank
están al
all the
frente de todo
people who
esto.
are pursuing all of this.
También deseo pedir
I
a
also want to
ustedes,
ask all of you,
tanto como a las personas que están
as well
en
as
este
all the people
proyecto,
that are part of the project,
que se le otorgue toda la ayuda posible a la comunidad
to
latina
provide all support to the Latino community
que actualmente reside en Ponderosa.
that that currently lives in Ponderosa.
Pienso que este sería un cambio positivo
I think that this would be a positive change,
y los cambios son buenos con el
and
tiempo.
changes are good with time.
Solo debemos tener confianza en uno mismo
We only need to trust ourselves
y en las personas que nos están apoyando.
and the people who are supporting us.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias. Okay, next up is Victor Manuel Lemos Vargas, pooling with Jose Contreras.
Muchas gracias a todos.
And do we have Jose? Is
Mi
Jose
nombre es-
Contreras? Hello,
Mi
thank you.
nombre es Víctor Lemos
My name is Victor Lemus.
y estoy aquí representando. También
and
soy uno de
I'm
las.
also
Perdón, soy uno de las personas que del comité de liderazgo.
I'm one of the resident leadership committee members.
Las familias están positivas en este proyecto.
Families are very positive about this project.
Sin embargo, todas estas familias les pedimos un grandísimo favor.
Nevertheless, we ask a big favor to most families.
Para todas las personas que van a apoyar este proyecto.
We ask a big favor to all the people supporting this project.
El favor que les pedimos tanto a las personas del
What we
ayuntamiento
asked City Council,
como a las personas que trabajan para Boulder
as
County,
well as people working for Boulder County,
es que busquen la mejor manera y los medios y los recursos tanto legales como económicos
Is that
para
they
que
seek
todas
the
las
best
familias de
legal and
Ponderosa
financial resources so that all
califiquen para
families in
comprar todas las
Ponderosa qualify
para comprar sus
to
casas.
be able to purchase their
No,
homes.
no importando cuál sea la situación de cada una de ellas.
Never mind what the situation of each family is or the situation. Yeah.
Y que no le den prioridad de compra a otras personas
And to not give priority of purchase to other members or people
que no sean de la
that
comunidad
are not part of
de
the
Ponderosa.
Ponderosa community
hasta que exploren todas las posibilidades
They
de compra de
explore-
las familias de Ponderosa.
they explore all possibilities for Ponderosa members to be able to purchase homes inside the community.
Okay. Algunas familias han tomado decisiones muy apresuradas
Some families took very sudden decisions
por diversas razones,
for various reasons,
pero también por la mala información que de algunas personas han manejado alrededor
but
de
mostly for
Ponderosa.
the lots of misinformation handled around Ponderosa.
La ciudad de Boulder nos ha
The city
reiterado
of Boulder
varias
have
ocasiones
reiterated to us
a
in
no hay
several occasions
desplazamiento.
that there will be no displacement.
Debido a estos malos rumores,
Due to these rumors,
las personas que trabajan en la ciudad en
people
conjunto con
who
Marina
have worked
Lagrave
in the city together with Marina Lagrave
han estado haciendo reuniones individuales
having holding individual meetings, one-on-one meetings,
para darles a conocer la verdadera información
to let this family know the real information
acerca de este proyecto.
about this project.
Están haciendo un gran trabajo.
They're doing
Muchas gracias a
they're
eso.
doing a great job. Thank you for that.
A los residentes de Ponderosa, de Ponderosa
To the Ponderosa residents,
nos llega la información a través de los medios
we
electrónicos
receive information through electronically,
por medio de un pequeño
through
periódico
the newsletter,
y ahora también por texto.
and also via text.
Quiero dejarles saber que las familias
I want to
latinas
let
que
you know that the
residimos en
Latino
Ponderosa
families that reside in
no
Ponderosa
estamos en contra de ningún
are
proyecto
not
de la
against
ciudad
any of the city projects
que tenga para un beneficio para Boulder.
that redounds in a benefit to Boulder.
Pero lo que sí quiero comentarles
What I want to comment
es que la mayoría de esas familias tienen dos
is that
trabajos
most of these families hold up to 2 jobs,
y tienen miedo de perder lo poquito que han
and
obtenido.
they fear of losing the little of what they have accomplished thus far.
Mi visión y misión
My
como líder
vision and mission as leader
es no crear miedo
is to
ni
not
incertidumbre a
instill
los residentes,
fear or doubt to the residents,
sino buscar las herramientas y los
but to
medios para,
find the tools and the means
para que todos los residentes de Ponderosa
so that
estén
all
bien
Ponderosa
informados
residents are well informed
y así cada uno de ellos tome sus decisiones para su beneficio.
and each individually can take their own decisions.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, go.
I think we have Esteban Alonso, and Tina Bogan, and Susan Lithgow. And if anybody
Primero
else
que
wants
nada-
to speak, please come up to Cindy now.
Okay, first of all,
Primero que nada, buenas noches.
good evening.
Y gracias por la oportunidad de hablar frente a
And
ustedes.
thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk before you.
Soy un residente de
I'm
Ponderosa.
a Ponderosa resident.
Tengo 2 hijos,
I have 2 kids,
una niña de 7 años
a 7-year-old girl
y un niño de 1 año.
and a year-old boy.
Ella adora ese lugar porque
My
puede
daughter
jugar,
loves this place because she can play,
porque los vecinos cuidan de ella.
because the neighbors look after her.
Ella puede correr en la calle sin preocupaciones de
She
que
can
un
run
carro le
free at
pueda
home without
atropellar.
fearing that a car is going to run over.
So, vengo a suplicar
I come to beg you,
o a pedirles que
or
por
to
favor
ask you to please
nos permitan quedarnos
allow us to stay
en esa pequeña
in
casa
that little home
que hemos construido
that we have built
a base de sudor,
based on our hard work,
en-
sweat,
que amamos y
and that we
adoramos.
love and cherished.
Y pues es todo. Muchas
And
gracias.
that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it, right?
No. Yeah, for you? Yeah.
Hi, my name's Tina Bogan. I'm a resident at Ponderosa for 16 years, and I'm on the Resident Leadership Committee. As you can see, there's a mix of what people want. And today we found out that the people that wish to stay in their mobile homes, we are written into the annexation, which is a great relief for those people. But I do want to add that as we move forward, most of these homes are pre-HUD, which means they don't meet any type of code, the mobile homes. So we are afraid that's going to be an issue. One issue that we've already talked about in our monthly meetings is that if you wanted to get a permit, say you wanted to put a new roof on your mobile home that you have because it's going to extend the life of that mobile home for 20 more years, they would come out and inspect and probably find that you were not up to code on many other things, which could leave you paying thousands of dollars potentially to have to come up to code. So it's kind of a little bit of a catch-22. Now, we were told that they're trying to get help program going again that used to be in Boulder County, I think, to help people fix up their mobile homes. The program hasn't started yet, but we don't have an understanding of, you'd still need permits to do some of these things. And I really do applaud these people for everything that they're doing here. We realize that they could have had us leave and scrape the place. So, I mean, they've worked really hard. We've all worked really hard. I just think that these things that are coming up as we go along really need to be scrutinized and talked about and figured out, or maybe even before we annex, so that we know. As you heard, these homes are not going to work for some of these people. They're going into retirement and don't want a 30-year mortgage, or can't. And then the other thing is about, somebody else spoke about detention ponds, displacing a dear neighbor of mine also, and we're unsure about the road on that end of the park, could possibly do the same thing. And I heard in a city council meeting that when you work for city offices, the mantra is do no harm. So I'm just wondering, is there another way to do these detention ponds? I did a little research. I found some other ways. They do them underground. I couldn't find any specific information on how close a home can be to that, but there has to be other solutions to just displacing possibly 6 more people to have detention ponds for a storm that none of us are probably going to be alive for. So, and just to answer your parking question, so we have 3 parking spots right now, and we're going to have 1. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Susan Lithgow. I'm Executive Director of Flatirons Habitat for Humanity, and I'm here this evening to lend my support for the Ponderosa site review and annexation application. We're pleased to work with the city and the residents to provide permanently affordable home ownership opportunities as part of this stabilization project. I've been particularly impressed with the inclusive process city staff has implemented throughout. To date, we at Habitat have met with over 25 families to help them get ready to apply for home ownership at Ponderosa through our program. Only one of them won't qualify, and that's due to documentation, and we have found a solution for that where we will create a rental opportunity with a 10-year opportunity for them to purchase the house under favorable terms. We're trying to create and solve let everyone be in a fixed foundation home who has the desire. If you don't have the desire, there is no obligation. In looking at all of the housing models that are being presented in this plan, I have done the math, and the most affordable project for the lowest AMI family will have a monthly housing cost of $554. That's at 40% of their monthly income. That translates to less than a $17,000 a year income. That is very low AMI and very affordable. It ranges from there. So there will be a wide variety of opportunities and product to be able to fit with what folks can afford. We're bringing forward our 20% or up to 20% silent second, we're also bringing to the table less than market rate affordable financing that we've arranged with third parties. This accomplishes two things for us. The money that we receive at closing through this mortgage, which is not typical for Habitat, lets us build the next house. Whereas under our typical Habitat model, we don't get any money, and it's very hard to build that next house. So we've created what I think is a really solid financing package to be here for the duration of this project. This could be a 10-year project, it could be a 30-year project. I really don't know, but we're committed to be here and partner with the city throughout this. There were some questions earlier. Sweat equity, I think, is a very important part of creating this project. I think it is also a very important way to help build even greater community in a neighborhood that has some pretty solid community. But I find that when people get side by side and build their houses together, they may or may not have commonalities now, but they often become close friends. And a lot of misunderstandings go by the wayside. So for me, sweat equity is much more than an alternative down payment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask? Susan?
You just have a clarifying question from her?
Just a clarifying question. Several of the residents spoke to the intersection of their age and taking on a new mortgage. Can you just give us some insight as to how Habitat for Humanity would address that concern?
There's no problem with it. We are building aging in place units into all of our new neighborhoods. In fact, I'm about to start a PUD process on what will be a predominantly aging in place. Fair Housing Act prohibits anyone from discriminating, whether giving a mortgage or selecting a house based on age.
No, I understand that, but what I heard people saying they were concerned about is that they would be burdened with a 30-year mortgage when they're already close to retirement. So is there, that seems like a legitimate concern. So how can Habitat for Humanity structure mortgages to address that concern?
We can shorten the mortgage, but it will increase the payments. If that's a possibility, then we can look at exploring that. No one is obligated to use our financing. If you want to go out and find alternative financing that is a better deal for you or better fits you, that is a possibility as well. But even at, hey, if I were looking at purchasing a house, I am of a certain age that I am now considered, I refuse to use the term senior, I am an older adult. I can do $554 for the next 30 or 40 years. I really can. And so, and these are fixed rate mortgages. They're kind of hard to get sometimes. So I don't think that age prohibits you from being able to qualify. If you're uncomfortable with taking on a mortgage, and I don't see how the mortgage is different than a land lease, because your land lease is indefinite as well. It's there as long as you're there. To me, the mortgage replaces the land lease, and in most cases, we're finding that the price is going to be a little bit cheaper. But no one has to assume that if they don't want to.
Okay, thank you.
Sandy, did we have anybody? Oh, sorry, Lupita.
One question. With regards to, one of the speakers, well, there's two speakers that spoke to something that I found interesting. One was with regards to families who already left Ponderosa because for some reason they felt that they would not be able to qualify to stay on. Are there possibilities for those people to return and maybe be part of this program as well?
So that's a great question, thank you. And we put some thought into that a few months ago. So the sort of the preference process that we would use is first residents that live in the Ponderosa community. Second would be those that had left, and third would be the community in general. So they would have preference after those who are currently living in the community. We also looked at the time that we purchased the community, which is in August 2017. So residents that were in place when we purchased Ponderosa at that time would have preference.
I'm also not aware of anyone with whom we've already met who has chosen to leave. None of them, except for one resident, has not been predetermined to qualify for a home ownership with us. if folks have left.
Okay, I don't
it's
think there was a
probably-
question that was directly
Okay.
asked. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other members of the public who wanted to speak? Okay, we've been here for 2 hours. Like to take a 5 or 10 minute break right now so people can stretch their legs, use the bathroom, what have you. And just a reminder to Planning Board that prior to deliberations, we're not going to be discussing this matter at all. Thank you. Okay, and I call the September 5th meeting back to order. And now we are into deliberation. That means that public comment is closed, and the conversation is happening up here at the dais between board members, unless we need to ask further questions of staff. So can we get up the key issues? And then I think I'd like to just go through the 5 key issues, or 6, sorry, key issues for discussion that were in the staff report. And I'm going to treat each one of these as a negative poll just to get started. And of course, if people have no issues, then we'll move on to the next one. And if people have issues, we'll discuss them. So the first key issue, does the project on balance meet the relevant goals and policies of the Boulder Valley Comp Plan? Anybody feel that the project on balance does not meet the relevant goals and policies of the comp plan?
It's not that I think that it doesn't, I just have some questions. Do you want me to just say?
Well, let's do the poll first, and then if we want to discuss it, we can still discuss it. So, no one?
To some extent, I have some
Your mic
clarifications. I forget. I have to turn this on. Sorry
We're
about
here
that.
for you.
Yes. Besides, I'm loud enough. I do have some questions as well, and that's in terms of, as we know, the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan has a lot of pieces and a lot of components, and while some pieces may be very clearly yes, there may be some parts where there's still some questions about it, and also there's in terms of which one should have the highest precedence. So to me, there's still a little bit of discussion to have.
So you want to just start us off with some specifics?
Yes, with regards to, the importance of increasing, and embracing diversity within the city. We have very few opportunities to clearly show our values in support of the very few diverse communities that we have in the city. And so this is a prime opportunity for us to really show our values and make sure that the most vulnerable in our community really are well served by the spirit of the BVCP. That's what I want to make sure we do.
So I guess for me, the questions have to do with affordability and what appears to be some uncertainty among residents about their capacity to afford, to take advantage of the move into the newer housing. And to Lupita's point, we want to make, and to the objectives of the project, just would like to understand a little bit more clearly those issues. And then I had some questions actually about parking and about the open space rezoning, but I think those are secondary to the affordability issues.
Okay, so do you want to ask those questions now under this key issue?
Yeah, let me ask, and I think it's going to be to Kurt. It does sound like there's some confusion or uncertainty, particularly among some of the older residents, and I feel I probably fit into that age group, about a guarantee almost that they can afford to make this shift if they want to. And can you speak to that a little bit more? That would be really helpful.
Sure, I think I can hopefully give some more clarity around that. So I think we first need to start with what they're paying now. So their pad rents, I think, are $533 per month. A survey that we did last year showed that the The average resident out there spends about $75 a month on repairs of their mobile home. What we found with utilities was a huge range. It ranges probably from between $80 and $300 per month. I sat with a family this weekend who, for the last couple of years, does not have heat. So when they get home at the end of the day, they turn their space heaters on. Their utilities were $300 a month, and they were struggling to keep their house warm. Another observation I had in meeting with many of the residents is that a large majority of them buy water. While they're on city water, the infrastructure is in such poor condition that they, even though they have low incomes, all of their water is bottled water. So their housing costs now are anywhere between $750 and upwards, and many of it is upwards from that per month currently. So the starting point is to create a housing option where they're paying similar to what they're paying now. And as Susan mentioned earlier, I think they've met with 25 or 26 families so far. All of them qualify from a financial perspective for those lowest income units. However, there are families there that make 50, 60, 80, or even 100% of the area median income. They can afford a higher monthly payment, and the cost of their home would also be higher as well.
So is the cost of the home a reflection of the type of home they're purchasing and what they can afford to pay? Or
That's
is
correct.
Okay.
So there could be a 2-story, 3-bedroom home that would be at one price. There could be the identical unit across the street that would be at a higher price based on their income. And so their monthly payment would be more, but the value of their house would also be higher.
And
that would create a variety of AMIs in the future as well.
Identical house.
Yes.
So if you were a current resident of a manufactured home in Ponderosa that was, I think you said the average is 600 square feet?
Currently, they average, I think, 900 square feet. Yeah.
900 square feet. But what you can afford is a $500 a month payment. Does that mean you can only purchase a home, a Habitat for Humanity home, for which there is a $500 payment, even if it's less than $9? Are you going to have to? Are there some folks who will have to downsize?
It's an individual situation, so I don't want to make commitments that way. However, there could be a 650 square foot home that would be the same price as a 2-bedroom, 1,100 square foot home. There's different drivers. You can see how that second can also bring the price down. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be based on what the needs of the family are and what they can afford. And we will use those different tools to create affordability.
And then just to address the question, the issue you brought up about some families having to buy water because the infrastructure is so bad at this point. If the city, when the city rebuilds the infrastructure, those costs will go down for the families that are, or individuals who are currently feeling they have to purchase water.
So even if you stay in your current mobile home, we will be running new infrastructure to that mobile home. Okay. So then your only challenge may be, pipes that are in your mobile home that could also be, challenging for your water. But it takes out a significant impact by putting in new infrastructure.
Then the other question that I had, which had to do with some combination of affordability and infrastructure, was Ed Zick's first, one of the points he made, which is sort of the timing of the infrastructure requirements and the impact that happens to be having specifically on his sister, whose home apparently is in where one of the detention ponds would go. Can you talk a little bit about the the timing of the infrastructure redevelopment and how many people that might displace, even if they wanted to stay in their homes?
Sure. So there are 3 households that will be impacted by the infrastructure and more specifically the detention ponds. We have spoken with all 3 of those residents and given them options to move to a higher quality mobile home that has been vacated by a family that has left, and keeping the same value of their original home. We are required to pay for the cost of moving those families from one mobile home to another, so we would cover any moving costs related to that as well.
And are the 3 families open to that opportunity?
2 of the families are, and 1 is still under discussion. And it happened. 2 of the residents, in particular, have mobile homes that are in extremely poor condition, and they're excited about the opportunity to move into a higher quality mobile home.
I don't want to, I have other questions, but there might, I don't want to monopolize. Thank you, I couldn't think of the word.
Okay, well, this isn't really a question session. If we were ready to talk about it, that's fine. If you're the only one with questions and you need to ask these questions before you can possibly deliberate, then ask your questions.
Okay.
Sarah, I can ask a question and give you a little bit of time. Yes. So I think one of the speakers also brought up the idea that there may be other ways to potentially help with the affordability, not only is bringing prices, but is there another way, maybe potentially raise additional subsidies for the people that are in this community so that everybody can afford an improved house? Has the city looked into that at all?
Yes, there will be subsidies going into some of these houses to bring the affordability down. There's subsidies going into infrastructure, into payment of the land. There's significant investment by the city into this project.
Thank you.
John?
So if several residents have mentioned that they are concerned about these financial consequences of a move, if they choose to stay in their existing home and not take advantage of the habitat potential, what changes will they experience in their monthly expenses?
Very little. At some point, they will have a water meter, so there will be a separate water cost. We would have to make consideration about whether their pad rent compensates, for that as well. Our anticipation, so we have been holding the pad rents for the last 2 years. We haven't raised them. We don't anticipate raising them for a couple of more years until the infrastructure is completed, and then they would go up at a very nominal rate, similar to what our affordable housing units would go up of around 2% a year. So we will be holding their pad rents for at least 4 years, which is something that they didn't experience under previous private ownership.
Okay, just to follow up on that. So we also heard from one speaker about the potential for code changes or requirements for old trailers to be improved or changed in some way that could lead to an expense. But would that happen as a consequence of what we're discussing tonight, or would it happen under any circumstances? I presume there's inspectors going around without regard to this project specifically.
Sure. So that's a great question. Currently they're in the county. Currently they're required to pull a building permit anytime they do work that requires a building permit. There's been a great deal of work that's happened in this community over the years that hasn't been permitted, and we've looked at the records of that over the years. I think there's been 2 permits pulled in like the last 15 years, and both of that work was done by outside contractors. Coming in through the annexation process, we are sort of grandfathering in the existing housing structures. However, if they were to do improvements to their home that would require a building permit, as it is now, it's part of our rules for Ponderosa, because we're currently the managers of Ponderosa, that anything that requires a permit must get a permit, and we will stop any work that requires a permit where it's not permitted. However, there will not be building inspectors making inspections of these homes or walking through these homes. If they required a new furnace, we encourage, as an example, we encourage residents to repair their furnaces versus getting a new furnace. However, if they do need a new furnace, the building department would look at health and safety issues. They would ensure that smoke detectors are in place, that they have egress. However, we have done inspections of all homes for smoke detectors and egress. All of the mobile homes out there have 2 egress points within each home. So we live in a regulated environment. We're trying to make that work as well as we can, but we can't really escape that.
So these homes would be treated in the same way as
they currently are.
As they currently are, and as all other equivalent homes are treated in Boulder.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Okay. And we're just going to use these key issues to influence the 3 motions that we're going to be making tonight. So it sounds like we've had a comp plan discussion as to our concerns about whether the application meets the goals and policies. The next question is, does the annexation that's proposed comport with the state statutes and the comp plan policies around annexation? Does anybody think that it does not? Are people comfortable just moving on, that this is statutorily and code-wise compliant? Okay, then let's go to number, you were going to say something, Dave?
Well, you know, I could just expound a little bit on why we're here to look at the criteria for what we will decide tonight. And we're listening, you know, why we're listening to the concerns of the community. And I've really appreciated the people who have come to talk to us for the last year. Teresa, we've seen you so many times. And, you know, you're really, you're very involved. You're a very involved, you're very involved community leaders, and I really respect that. This annexation kind of gets to the key of why we need to look at this from a criteria-based lens, because we have a little enclave that is really needing to be addressed within the city. And so as I look at all these BVCP policies, I think to myself, do I feel like the city's doing the best job that they can for you? And is there anything specific we could ask for to help your trust level go up? And so I just wanted to make that general comment that as we go through these individual things, we are looking for things that will assure us that, yes, the affordability things are being addressed, that your costs are being taken into account, that there's flexibility for you to stay in your existing homes to the best possible way, right? So I just wanted to make that statement since we're on number 2 here, because I think it is part of deliberation for us to talk about how we are struggling to convince ourselves of going a certain way based on the criteria. So.
Okay, well, then I'll fill in a little bit more on annexation, and I'm not going to go through all the different statutory requirements for annexation or the comprehensive plan requirements for criteria for annexation, but one thing that I think is worth pointing out is that Area 2 enclave, that is properties that are surrounded 100% by the city, are meant to be aggressively pursued for annexation by the city. And This is one of those, and one of the reasons is that it's very difficult to have the cross-jurisdictional service provision when you've got this little pocket of county land that has to be served by the county sheriff rather than the city's police force, for example, when something happens there. So that's just we're getting our reasons on the record for why we support the annexation. Does anybody else have any other comments, or should we move? Okay, so, sorry?
Thanks for expounding on that.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
So 3 is, does the proposed change to the comp plan's land use map to medium-density residential meet the applicable criteria? And staff's done a nice job. I think it starts on page 23, just going through the criteria for a land use map change. So you can see, starting on 24, the bold sentences. So the first criterion is that on balance it's consistent with the policies and overall intent of the comp plan, and I think we already talked about that in key issue number 1, but if anybody has any comments directly to that in light of the map change, we can talk about that. Yeah, John.
Yeah, I have a comment there, and I think it does satisfy the criteria, but I think that the process used with respect to the change in the OSO land needs to be changed in the future. I think a change of OSO land, open space other, is potentially significant enough that it should be run by the board, the open space board. And so I'm not going to, object to it here, but in general, I think that process should be changed.
Okay. Any other comments?
I'll just agree with John. I actually highlighted in my notes to myself the OSO and pointed out to myself Boulder Valley Comp Plan 3.06, which talks about the importance of not touching the limited natural and human-made wetlands and riparian areas because of their value to the city and to the natural surroundings. And I was just wondering whether or not there is some way to, I realize it's a very small sliver, but in fact it is not, the packet states that the applicant will not develop within the wetland buffer areas, but in fact, at least according to the maps as I understand them, it does. And at the northwest corner where there's a little parking lot and what are labeled units 1B, 2B, and 2C, and then again in the northeast corner where Ponderosa Avenue would curve into Ponderosa Court, and a unit what is labeled 68B. If I'm reading these maps correctly, and I may not be, in both of those areas, the applicant, meaning the city, is actually planning to have some development within those wetland buffer areas. And I understand it's a small piece, but it does concern me that even that small amount was not approved by the appropriate citizen board.
Okay, I'm going to ask staff to respond to you on that one.
Yeah, there's not going to be any structures in the inner or outer buffer. We do allow flat work and paths in the outer buffer, and there'll also be a flood control easement over all of it as well, if I'm not mistaken.
There'll be in the general location of the outer buffer as part of the annexation, and the purpose of that is for the 4-mile Canyon Creek mitigation project.
So then these I'm looking at map S on sheet S1, and down if I go to the northeast corner of the site where it says Wishing Well parking, bicycle parking, and it's the curve from Ponderosa Avenue to Ponderosa Court. According to your own map lines, that is within the outer buffer setback and the inner buffer setback. And then the OSO boundary is that dotted line that runs the length of the map. And that is, there is some development on there.
So I'm looking at the outer buffer setbacks, and there are no structures within there. Part of the carniceria is in there. That's an existing building, which
Do you not consider a road a structure?
it's considered flat work. Yeah.
So that's permitted
Okay,
in the city's wetland regulations.
okay, thank you.
Okay, so any other comments about that? Yeah, I just want to say, for the sake of argument, I think that the process was adequate in this situation. I think we've seen that OSO was, while not indiscriminately splashed around on the land use map of the comprehensive plan, it was placed in some pretty funny areas, like the poster child is the Liquor Mart parking lot is OSO, part of it. So now let me finish, John. But I think that if we created some sort of a policy where every time any OSO were to be, considered for a change, the Open Space Board of Trustees had to sign off on it first. For situations like this, where there's really no park or open space value to this little strip of land, I think it's a waste of their time. And I'm really quite satisfied that we have open space staff that determines when open space resources are being called into question and forwards those applications to the board. And when open space resources are not being called into question and we merely have a bit of open space other on a land use map, they don't place an additional item on the Open Space Board of Trustees agenda. That's just my opinion. Go for it.
Well, not to drag this out, but it's clear we have different opinions on what the significance of open space other is. And I'd just like to go on record that I appear to give it more significance than you do. So.
Okay. Like I said, for the sake of argument, that was for the sake of argument, which small argument it was. Okay, so the board's opinion here in our deliberation as we go through the issues is that the change to medium-density residential meets the applicable criteria, and with a bit of question about what the process should be for changing open space other out of open space. Okay, so let's move on to key issue number 4, which is oh, wait a minute. There's still several different, so the other criteria for number 3 for changes to land use maps are would not have significant cross-jurisdictional impacts that may affect residents, properties, or facilities outside the city. Probably not applicable to an enclave property. Anybody have anything around that? Okay. Would not materially affect the land use and growth projections that were the basis of the comp plan. Any concerns there? Okay. And I think because we're talking about 68 mobile homes and 73 units, it's just a de minimis amount. So it doesn't affect any growth projections in any material way. Does not materially affect the adequacy or availability of urban facilities and services to the immediate area or to the overall service area of the city of Boulder. Any comments there? David?
No.
No? Just, all right. All right, then would not materially affect the adopted capital improvements program of the city of Boulder?
I don't think it does, because I think that this work is already included in the capital improvement program.
And has undergone a SEEP.
Been adopted. But I just want to confirm that with staff.
The work on Broadway and as part of the floodplain mitigation has, but as far as I'm aware, there's no project specific to this property and this project that was approved through a SEEP or a CIP. Right, it's a private development.
I'm sorry, can you speak up?
It's a private development, so it wouldn't be approved through those processes.
Oh, so then it doesn't affect the, okay, so we're satisfied on that.
Right, even better, we're not taxing ourselves for the infrastructure. And then would not affect the Area 2, Area 3 boundaries in the comp plan. Issues?
Well, it affects it, but in an acceptable manner.
Right, that's right, because it's an Area 2 that's slated for annexation.
Right.
Okay, and it's not adjacent to Area 3, so it doesn't affect that boundary. All right, so based on our going through the analysis, the planning board seems to have determined that the land use map change is appropriate. So let's move on to the zoning change. Number 4 is the proposed zoning of RM2 appropriate for the site, considering the context of the surrounding area. Anyone can start. Well, let's do the negative poll first. Does anybody feel that it is not appropriate for the context?
I still have a little bit doubts on regard.
Is your mic on?
Yes. My brain is the one that's not on. So this is the one piece where I'm still not clear, because it is zoning for an RM2. The most recent development, Rosewood, is an RM1. And I'm wondering, as you start building in the Ponderosa area, we're going to go with the single-family houses first, because it's most likely what the people want right now. Do I understand that right?
There will be some single family, but there'll also be a duplex and a triplex in the first phase.
On the first phase, and they seem to be already families interested in those choices.
I don't know about that.
It would be nice to just kind of know, because I think some of what I heard is that people are concerned about having to change their housing choices. And so if that can be somewhat appeased, will be good.
So hopefully I can answer your question. So the recent survey that we did, which was done in August of this year, as you would have saw, showed that 60% of the families currently, as with the information they know now, are interested in a Habitat home. 14 of the homes in the entire development are slotted to be single-family homes. But again, there'll be a variety of sizes within that as well. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yes, well, 14 out of 68, and I'm wondering if that will suffice for people who want to have a single house, a single-family
Sure.
house.
Okay.
Also, there, as the time progresses, my wondering is people will not have that option anymore, because in the suite of choices that they have, there will be fewer and fewer of those available to people.
So our approach was to create as many single-family homes as possible in the development. And as we're trying to do one of the approaches is to do kind of a one-for-one replacement as best we can, but you can only do that when you start putting houses together, again, because of the fire setbacks don't work right now. So we created single families where we could, and then did duplexes or triplexes where we sort of had to. The reality is that the duplexes actually create larger homes. So that's sort of the advantage of that approach as well.
I do want to clarify that I appreciate what you're working with. I know it's not an easy thing. Just wanted for clarification, because I know that you have to now bring things to compliance in terms of coding, and
Sure.
I understand, so I appreciate it.
If I could also add that the Affordable Housing Program hasn't built single-family homes in years. It just doesn't really exist in Boulder. This is really the one opportunity to get a handful of them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. We need to convey that to the community. Very well, yeah. Make sure that.
Sorry, public comments closed, sorry. Any other issues with this? Okay. So we'll move on to, and I think a positive statement on the record is important. So does anybody want to make a positive statement of why the RM2 is appropriate?
I will. When we looked at the concept plan, and I looked back at the notes and I looked at the minutes, there was a pretty a pretty strong message sent from this board that I saw, and anyone who was there can correct me if they remember this differently, that RM1, RM2, and RM3 would all be acceptable, and that the selection of which one of those zoning designations should depend on the kinds of things that you guys have been working on for the last year. So I think that we sent a message that RM2 would be acceptable at the time, and I think we were looking at those zones pretty carefully at the time as well. So I just thought I'd throw that in there.
And I'll just add that, oh, sorry.
I was going to add something positive as well, which leads to number 5, which is I really appreciate the work that the various partner design partners did to create the opportunity for this neighborhood to look very much like and fit very closely in with the other neighborhoods in the area. It's quite a lovely design. The style of house and the neo-traditional, or whatever the language is, I think they did a lovely job.
And I would just add that the RM2 is a flexible district that allows us to meet our comprehensive goal of a diversity of housing types. And also, if we were to go with a lower density zone district, I think it would fly in the face of council's commitment to the non-displacement goal when they purchased the lot. So, anything else, Peter? No? Okay. That's great. Thanks. Okay, so number 5, we'll move on. Is the project consistent with the North Boulder Subcommunity Plan? First, let's do the negative poll. Does anybody feel that it is inconsistent with the North Boulder Subcommunity Plan? John?
I think in general, this is consistent with the subcommunity plan. I do think that the subcommunity plan did not envision the flood issues past Broadway and the access concerns that have been raised and constrain the design here. In that sense, it's not consistent because the subcommunity plan was has been outdated to some extent or superseded by events. But in general, I think it except for that little element, I think it is consistent. Okay. And that element doesn't eliminate its consistency.
Okay. Well said. All right. Then let's move on to the last key issue. Does the project meet the applicable site review criteria? Negative poll, does anybody think that it does not meet? Okay. Then we'll start with Sarah, so our finger up first.
Okay, so I am a little concerned about the western property, the very tiny setback on the western property line. I understand the limitations of the property itself, but to go from a required 25 feet to a 1.5 foot rear yard setback just strikes me as a significant decrease. That's one concern I have. I also am concerned about allowing fewer trees than required, and I read the packet, I understand why, but I'm wondering if in lieu of the limitations from the overhead power lines, et cetera, if we can find a way to increase the amount of foliage and ground cover that's not lawn, because at least in the drawings, it looked like most of the ground cover was green grass. Not to say have no grass, but to have a lush, appropriate landscape in lieu of some of the tree cover that we're losing. So those were my concerns.
Anyone else? John?
Yeah, I'm concerned about the amount of parking associated with this, and I understand completely the desires of the residents to have a lot of parking, but that's true of every neighborhood in town. Every neighborhood has reasons why they would like to have more parking, and so I think that it is. I'm not convinced that we need an exception here.
Well, I don't think they're asking for an exception. I think they're just proposing more parking than is required. So
they're proposing more parking than is required, but that is inconsistent with our general attitude in town of trying to diminish the amount of land devoted to parking.
Go ahead.
Well, I had a slightly different take. When I read that, I really felt like the decision that went into that was to evaluate, and we are really trying to keep people from getting displaced. And when we evaluated the types of activities that these folks are engaging in at this time on their properties, it was determined that in fact people do spend more than most citizens in Boulder working on projects in their garages and perhaps even things that add to their income, and that the needs of this particular population require them maybe to be a little more car dependent than the average citizen in Boulder. And I was kind of actually really impressed with that sort of tailoring of the site review to the needs of the particular group. So to me, and since the alternative is to ask for a parking reduction, to me it was kind of refreshing, and I hope it does help the folks to make better use of to have good use of that space. So I did not share the same reaction as you on that one, John, but I see where you're coming from, but I thought it was a good tailoring of the solution to the population that we're addressing.
So I actually really went back and forth on both of these positions. And I think from my perspective, it points to some inconsistency. I'm not going to vote against this because of it, but it points to some inconsistencies in the way we're approaching parking. And if I realize, again, there aren't a lot of analogs to this particular project in the city, and I certainly don't want to displace any. I certainly want to make sure that we take the actions necessary to limit or negate any displacement. But that's probably true in almost every new development that's going to come our way. And we've made a bunch of assumptions about who's going to live in certain types of places and who is going to be okay with 0.9 parking spots per dwelling unit or 0.8 parking spots per dwelling unit or 0 parking spots per dwelling unit. And I just think this brings into focus perhaps some deeper conversation about how we figure that out going forward. That's all. It's so complicated.
Go ahead, Lupita.
This is one thing where I could add maybe a little bit, because I do know a number of families that live in this general area, and I know for a fact that many of them work in fields where they live off their car, basically. They work in construction, they work in gardening, they do handiwork, and so literally, for the most part, that is their livelihood. So somebody mentioned that before. And so, in fact, I just got to drive one of those trucks 2 days ago as a favor, because I was on my bus and I needed to go and change before my second soccer game. And one of these people very generously just let me drive their car to my house to go and change. These are very generous people. I just like to say these things because I want you to know that we have very, very strong communities, and we don't hear from them, but they do exist, and they are very, very tight people. And we need to do well by these people. They work very, very hard, and it's not just 2 jobs. I know families where the father has 3 jobs. So they do the best they can. So for us to bend the rules sometimes a little bit, I will encourage us to open that the possibility that in some cases is necessary. So that's kind of just what I wanted to add about that. And I did wanted to, in terms of other things that I'm concerned about, I'm still a little bit concerned about the issue with the closing of Broadway entrance. And I would like to know a little bit more about if there are any other possibilities to improve that situation so that that doesn't go away, or that definitely there is a clear plan so that access to that area or egress from that area is facilitated, because it seems to me that it's difficult. We did have one person speak about the safety of the children there. And I had a question in my original notes about asking whether we know what the average number of children are per square, I mean, on a surface area, like, let's figure it out compared to the average residents in Boulder. I will suggest is much higher. So if we are changing traffic patterns, closing streets, that the safety factor may be becoming a little bit more problematic, especially with children, as children are. Sometimes they don't necessarily look up both ways that they're supposed to do. So I mentioned about the car dependency on this community that is real. And I also concerned a little bit about the perception that the community may have with regards of what the city is doing, enough for them. And you heard that they're thankful. And I heard that, which is kind of unusual to have the people from the community say, thank you for everything you're doing for us, because it's usually not what they say. Until after they figure out that we are on their side, but initially they don't necessarily think that. So I think that everybody's coming to terms that we are here to do the best we can for the community. And so I was pleased to hear that, because that's a very Latino thing to say. I would like the city to be very informed in terms of the best alternatives that we can do for this particular community, so that they come out of here feeling like we do have their backs. Just like I think some of the communities that came before us for the big lots felt that way towards the end, so I think that will be a great thing. So I think those are my main points. My concerns regarding the Broadway entrance, safety of the children, the car dependency, which is kind of unusual for this community, and the perception that the community have. And so I think a lot of it can be done by us be better informed, so we can make the best possible decisions.
Can I just raise a process question?
Sure.
So questions, concerns, for example, about the Cherry Avenue and 10th Avenue intersection. How do we, as a panel, discuss that? Like, what are our options or opportunities today to discuss that?
Well, I think that if you wanted to find a site review criterion, for example, regarding access that gave you a way in to suggest a change or a condition, that would be something you could try.
And so similar to the question of access through Broadway.
Yeah, I think you'll
We
need to try to
had,
make that point.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
We had quite a lot of conversation about the Broadway access and all of the proposed accesses during concept review. And, of course, during concept review, we gave a lot of encouragement to look at various things. And I kind of, since then, I actually researched a lot of the constraints that we're under with regards to the city requirements that the egress be to the, to the lowest.
Category street.
Thank you, category street. Thank you. Sometimes words escape me. I had to come to terms with that because I see that, clearly that is a lot less convenient for the residents, but we have reasons for that, and I think that, I've certainly become more at peace with the overall plan and the way that it melds with the Broadway corridor planning in general. So I realize that it is, more circulation around. The other thing that I remember kind of wishing that we could do was maybe have a pedestrian underpass across Cherry or something like that, because the Waldorf School is there, or some sort of interesting way to get, to and from the Waldorf School, because there's work going on over there as well. But I'm sure those conversations happened, and we are where we are.
No comments at all? Okay. I'm going to just jump in and talk a little bit about the site review criteria. So the first one is kind of a follow-up to Sarah's question, or Sarah's issue with the setbacks, particularly on the western Phase 1 properties. And maybe you could talk to this, Kurt, or maybe, well, there aren't any transportation planners left, but I remember when we had concept review about a year and change ago, 15 months ago, I think I had looked at something in the dedication of that alleyway, and it looked like maybe the Rosewood development to the west hadn't been required to leave much backup area or setback to the alleyway in their development, which was why we were so pinched in doing this development. And I think I had asked in the concept plan that somebody from staff take a look at that. Did we find out anything that would answer that question?
I guess what I would say is, looking at that alley, it's at 1000 Rosewood, it's developed similar to other alleys where really the structure is allowed to go as close to the alley as possible as long as they can meet that 24 feet backing distance.
Yeah.
So in this situation, it's a little odd because that property line is considered a rear yard, but really it functions more like a side yard setback, which the typical requirement would be 5 feet. And they would have to show that they meet the 24 feet, which they've done in this case.
Okay. So it sounds like maybe Rosewood didn't, it was treated like a side setback for Rosewood?
It's possible, I don't know for sure, but that is the way it's constructed.
Yeah. So I think for me, the existing condition is kind of the classic hardship that one would go to a Board of Adjustment to ask for a variance from, because you've got this neighbor that's already pinched the alleyway as much as it can be. And I'm not, I think the purpose of site review is to allow for those types of changes to be permitted without having to go in front of the zoning board, provided that the application meets the goals and the criteria in site review. So I think I'm all right with the limited setbacks on the west end of the property. So let's see, I'm trying to remember what the next one was. Sarah, what was the next thing you were?
Trees.
The trees.
Yeah.
I didn't have an issue with the trees. I guess I'll just say that I think the design of the project seems to meet a lot of the site review criteria with sensitive design, context-sensitive design, building forward design. I think the community center is kind of a cool, like, airport Bauhaus or something, like International Garage. I don't know, but I'm just saying that because I think Brian's watching. So I know I'm going to get his goat with that. But no, I think the design of the project is good. And I'll leave it at that. Con?
I'm sorry, is there, I take your point about it being an existing condition, but is there, does, it looks like in the drawings that because of that existing condition, what's going to be built on that first western edge is pretty limited, it's pretty specific. It looks like it's mostly the carriage houses, is that correct? And duplexes? In that little corner up in the, How does that, okay. Is there any wiggle room at all to make that western edge deeper coming into the project? To maybe?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time looking at that. And the challenge with that is that then it starts to encroach on existing mobile homes, which we don't want to do. So it was, so the approach that we took is actually, as Sloan said, actually meeting all the required standards, which it does from a design standpoint.
And do you have a sense of interest from current residents for those particular carriage house style homes?
I've had a couple residents that have shown interest in that, but we're really not far enough down the road to know, who's interested in which ones. The application process for Habitat will start in January, so any meetings that have happened with Habitat individually have been sort of pre-meetings to look at pre-qualification. Yeah.
So if you were, I'm sorry to ask a hypothetical, but if a family came to you and said, we very much want to participate, and we want to do it right now, but we would like a single-family home, could the footprints on that edge lot change enough that instead of doing a carriage house, you could build a single-family home? And I'm just,
well,
how much flexibility do you actually have?
Sure. All the carriage homes are single-family homes.
I'm sorry, I really meant a one or two-story single-family home rather than the carriage, rather than the carriage house on top of the garage.
Yeah, so some of the carriage houses are actually at grade.
Okay.
And some have the parking underneath.
Okay.
Parking was the other comment that I was going to make, and I just wanted to say that I think with, because of the narrow streets and the lack of on-street parking, it doesn't seem to me like, even though we're counting each and every one of these parking spaces because they're all structured in some way, they're either in a parking pad or they're in a garage, the number looks big. It looks like 2 parking spaces per unit. But in fact, when you look at a RL1 house with a driveway that's 60 feet long in the back of the lot, in a garage that has 2 car spaces in it, and then 100 feet of frontage where you can put, 5 cars at 20 feet per slot, the actual number of cars that you can put in an RL1 lot is like 9. Right. And so here, we're counting 2 per unit, but that's all that you can put there because there's no space anywhere else. So I just think the count's deceptive, and I'm not that concerned with the number of cars that are actually going to live there.
Right, no, I hear you, and I think the strong argument is made for the solution that the city came up with, and it meets the needs of the residents. From my perspective, I just think it points to a challenge we have across the city, and I just don't want us to ignore that we have that challenge, and if we could be thoughtful, which we are, I don't want to suggest we're not, but that we just acknowledge that when all these other projects come before us. That's all.
Good point. Okay, John?
Well, I stand by my point. I think this comes up in every neighborhood. Every neighborhood has good reasons why they want it. But in addition, have you thought about unbundling the parking? That is to say, charging for parking spaces if you're going to supply them. This is something we've required in other projects, and I haven't heard it mentioned here.
Yeah, so Danica may want to add something on top of this, but we've gone through a lot of the same thought processes that you have. However, underlying all this is really about affordability. So we've taken that approach. There's not a solution that really weaves both sides of this well.
Well, I understand the affordability aspect. At the same time, we're trying to change people's behavior to some extent, and with this project, you've essentially given up on that as far as I can tell.
So John, let me say that I totally agree with you. However, in listening to the needs and the requirements of the residents, that's what we're trying to balance. I get it that you hear that on other projects. The difference on this project is that these people already live here, and we're trying to serve the residents in this existing community. So it's a challenge that we acknowledge. Yep.
I want to add that parking is currently managed and it will continue to be managed. So that is what's different too. This isn't a single family neighborhood. So people do get assigned parking spots and it is managed. And I will add, there are food trucks, there are landscape vehicles. I mean, these are big cars with multiple cars. People run bounce house companies. So we did do a survey. And in fact, there were more than 3 spaces per household in most occasions, these multi-generational families. So this was a pretty big compromise, I would think, if you ask the community members. So we also, can look in the future. There are some parking areas. If we're not using the parking, more parks. But for now, I think we're already as constrained as we can be.
Okay, does anybody have anything else they want to talk about with whether the project meets the applicable site review criteria? No? Okay. Then I think we ought to shut down the deliberation and move on to looking at the motions. Well, that's still part of deliberation, but let's look at the motions. So do I have a maker for the first motion? And of course, we can discuss the motion after it's on the table. Anybody want to make the first motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Sarah, go ahead.
Ever.
Do it.
I move to make a motion to approve case number LUR 2019-00015, a Boulder Valley Comp Plan land use map designation change for the property at 4475 Broadway from manufactured housing and open space other to medium density residential.
Is that a second, Lupita? Okay. What's that?
That's why I looked at Lupita.
Okay, so we have a motion by Silver, and it's been seconded by Montoya. And is there any discussion to the motion? Okay, then I'm going to say that the motion that Sarah read has become the motion of the board. And I'm going to call the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, do we have a second motion maker?
For the second one?
Yeah? Oh,
Yes, that one.
Okay.
That infrastructure in place.
do it, Lupita. You can make that motion.
This is
So the second one, just to recommend to City Council the approval of the proposed annexation with initial zoning of residential medium 2, MR2, for 4475 Broadway pertaining to case number LUR 2019-00016, incorporating the staff memorandum as findings of fact, subject to the recommended conditions of approval for the annexation as provided for the memorandum of understanding in attachment C.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, and Sarah's seconding that, so we have a motion by Montoya and seconded by Silver. Any discussion around that motion? Okay, then Planning Board so recommends would be the motion, the language that's in the middle there. I'm not going to repeat that language. And I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Do we have a motion maker for motion number 3? David?
where you go.
You want to run the table? Oh, no.
Sure. Motion to approve site review case number LUR 2019-00015, incorporating the staff memorandum and the attached site review criteria checklist as findings of facts and subject to the conditions of approval recommended in the staff memorandum.
I'll second that.
Okay. So we have a motion by Vitale and seconded by Ensign, and that is now the motion of the planning board. Does anyone have anything to say to that motion?
Just a clarification. Do we have some recommendations that we wanted to add to this?
Does anybody have any additional conditions they would like to apply to this motion? To John?
Well, I won't propose conditions because I suspect that it wouldn't gain a majority here tonight. But I would like to say that I will be voting to approve this, to move ahead with the site review. But I continue my comments with respect to parking. I think that it is easy to give away arrangements and very difficult to tighten them in the future. And what we're doing is making it very difficult in the future to change the parking arrangements in a way that would be consistent with our other efforts in town. That said, I think we should move ahead with this because I sense that there's not a majority in support of my concerns.
Well, I will add that I really appreciate you making that point. And I feel the same way about it as you do, or at least I feel the same way as it seems you do from what you said. And I think that there are a lot of moving parts in this, and the fact that, you know, there are some really significant subsidies involved, make the next thing that I'm going to say probably less important. And I was eventually swayed by Kurt talking about how the difference in this project is that the people actually live here already. But I think that the thing about unbundling parking, which makes it so attractive for affordable housing projects, is that we know that in your average, say, $180,000 apartment, one-bedroom apartment in Boulder, 40,000 of it is the parking for that apartment. And if you want to create additional affordability, unbundling it so people who don't want to have that parking spot gives them an opportunity to buy a $140,000 unit instead of a $180,000 unit. So, again, this one with the silent seconds and stuff, there's so many other subsidies in here that I'm not sure having the ability to unbundle parking and create additional affordability would actually change the monthly payment for anybody, because there are already mechanisms to bring that monthly payment down to an affordable level. But I would just back you up and say that I think that sub-principles for parking are just as important, if not more important, when we're trying to create affordability than when we're building houses for rich people.
Thank you.
Any other comments before I call the question? Okay, then all in favor of the motion that is on the table regarding the site review, all in favor say aye. 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 Okay, that's it. Congratulations to the applicant. You have a couple of approvals and one recommendation. Okay, we'll give everybody a minute to clear out, and then I think we're just doing a little housekeeping and the meeting will be over. Okay, so Cindy, do we have any matters or? No?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Anything from planning, Charles?
Oh, okay, I have a...
I'm out the 19th.
Well, we'll do that on calendar check.
I have a matter. Are we on matters yet, or?
We are on matters from the planning board. We just passed over it, but could I ask the public to please either keep quiet or take the noise outside? We're still just trying to finish this meeting up. Thank you. John?
Yeah. I would like to ask how we and staff follow up on conditions associated with projects that Planning Board has approved. And the reason I inquire about that is because I was recently in the Washington Village project, where two people have mentioned to me that they have erected fences and gates to prevent people from going through the project from Broadway to 13th. And one of the conditions under which we approved that project was that there be paths along the north side of that lot that would allow public transit through from Broadway to 13th. And when I attempted to do that, I was accosted by a very aggressive guard who told me that the attorney hired by the association there had arranged with the city to close that off. And I just wonder how we're paying attention to those kind of things and enforcing those.
I'm certainly not aware of any such arrangement, and we're absolutely happy to go out there and investigate and make sure that it's consistent with the site review approval.
Very good. And maybe you can let us know.
Happy to follow back up with the board.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra.
And I guess another thing that Charles, you could probably speak to is that some of the conditions of approval are actually part of a final checklist that an application has to meet after the conditional approval they're granted here, and there's a time limit before that will expire.
Right, and so we do a final zoning and architecture inspection in addition to landscaping and everything else. It's not uncommon for things like fences and, kind of changes to access to appear after that final inspection. So we typically find out about it on a complaint basis.
And you're able to then go back?
Oh, absolutely. We can enforce against it and
Okay, I think
ensure that
this
it's
is a
consistent.
classic
with the-
example.
Yeah, it probably is, but I appreciate you bringing it to our attention.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Any other matters? Yes? Yeah. No? Okay. All right, so we were up to Hella. Anything from the city attorney? Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to debrief about this meeting at all before we do calendar check?
I mean, I think this conversation about parking is super important, and I don't want to speak for John, but I think I know him well enough to know his argument was not to prevent or inhibit or harm the residents of this community. And you know, we are trying to apply sort of across more consistent principles across the city. And I can imagine folks from Alpine Balsam or other developments coming back and saying, what the heck? And I think that they would be well within their rights to do that, given the vast difference between a 0.8 and 2. So I think it's a really important conversation to have, and I really appreciate the way we had the conversation and that nobody made accusations or made assumptions about why the issue was raised. So I really appreciate that.
I think it was important that we remembered that, to get our facts straight, though, is that this was an environment where there were existing residents. Therefore, the logic doesn't follow that it's being treated differently. It is different.
Well, and also the site review criteria are context sensitive.
Yeah.
And so, you know, while an aggrieved member of the Alpine Balsam public could say, why are you treating us differently than you treated Ponderosa? The appropriate response is because that's the way we treat site review projects. There is no one size fits all for a site review project.
Yeah, fair enough, but someone could come back and say, and I don't want to litigate.
We're already putting words in people's mouths that don't exist yet.
But you know, someone could come back and say, well, we would like to see Alpine Balsam, the 3 quadrants on Alpine Balsam that we know will be housing to be residential medium 2, and that allows for 2 parking spots per unit. And again, the facts are different, the situation is different, the site review is different, all that stuff. And yet we do talk about quite a bit wanting to apply the sump principles and reduce parking. And I just realized that it is not completely consistent.
This is the difference between equality. This goes to the heart of what the difference between equality and equity. When people want to apply the same rule to everybody, and some people, when you apply those rules, you still at a disadvantage, because if you don't give these people space for their work, it's not the same as I want my 4 cylinders so I can go skiing on the weekends. These are people who have cars so that they can make a living, and they're already making very little to make that living. So that's the thing. I would love to teach the Boulderites here who can have anything about this so they can learn something, because it's very important to know how to apply rules and when to apply compassion. And so this was a day for compassion.
So that's super helpful, but it raises a question to me on any of the developments where we are using the fact of city-owned land to encourage affordability. And again, Alpine Balsam is now one of those areas. How can we, and there's no answer to this question tonight, but how can we?
It's a good place to start thinking.
Right, how can we think about, how do we serve more of the type of community members who we were able to serve tonight at places like Alpine Balsam or Pearl and 30th, Transit Village, because we can't just have one site where we have made it possible for community members who make their living relying on their cars to be able to park their cars.
Well, and Yeah, may I? Perhaps there, with this particular, with the site review we saw today, there could have been an opportunity, and, maybe we could have talked about that during deliberation. It didn't occur to me at the time. But, if there had been a creative kind of angle on this by which, yes, we are approving this as a maximum amount of parking. However, as we choose solutions for the folks, if we run across folks who don't need as much parking, we'll reward them with additional living space. And, and this is how that would work. And I don't know how it would look exactly, but it might have maybe given us a little bit more assurance that there was a mechanism by which you could start moving towards less parking-dependent community. And that, I think that, that's kind of like water under the bridge, and I guess that's why we were kind of deconstructing. But yeah, that might help the story. I think we do have a good story, though. I really do. I think that this is not just your average greenfield development. This is where we're really trying to help these folks along. There's a lot of fear in the community, and I think this was one of the things that could be done to help them feel that they live in units where they have a lot of yard area that they may park stuff in, and they do stuff. This helps them feel like they can migrate that into their new space that doesn't have that, right? So, yeah, I'm only looking at you, Sarah. I don't know.
All right, have we debriefed?
Are we debriefed?
I believe we're debriefed.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that it's important that we realize that when we're talking with the members of the public, that we're not really supposed to be having a colloquy with the members of the public. If you want to ask them to explain something they said a little bit better, that's one thing, but to challenge them on something that they said is not acceptable. And, the same goes for, I think, when we're talking with staff and we're asking staff about their motivations for a decision that they made. You get your answer from staff, and then you can take it back to the board for deliberation. I don't appreciate, and I don't think staff appreciates having their motivations questioned for making a decision. And, those are my comments from sitting in rooms like this on and off for the last 25 years. It's just important for the way that relationships work and the meeting runs.
So if you can explain motivations versus understanding of logic.
Yeah, if you ask staff, let's say, why did you pick RM2, and they tell you, you don't say, well, I don't agree with you because I think this. You already got your answer. You can tell your fellow planning board members.
Well, maybe not necessarily. No, it's not necessarily the answer because, no, I can hear me. Because
It's for the record. It's for the record.
Oh, for the record.
It's not us.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So, for example, I know that I asked a question like that. It was really trying to find the reasoning so that I can be right there with a person, because I was missing a piece in there, and I really wanted to feel comfortable about what that piece that was missing. So for my benefit, so I was completely on board on it. And sometimes I just didn't catch some of these things that I was hoping as I was asking the question that he would just say the right thing that was just completely clear up that one little doubt that I had in my mind, because I have some ideas and that wasn't completely clear. But it was not about challenging the motivation. It's more about understanding the logic behind it so that I can be on right there with the person. I wasn't challenging in that way.
What you just said doesn't sound like challenging. It sounds like asking more questions, which is fine.
Yeah, that's what my thought was.
Okay. All right. Anybody need to debrief anymore? Okay, then calendar check.
I'm out on the 19th in DC.
Okay, so our next meeting's 2 weeks from now on the 19th, Cindy?
Yes.
Okay, and David, you're out too?
I'm out.
I think I've already mentioned my schedule also.
Okay,
Yes.
so we have 4 people maximum
Yes.
for the 19th.
On the 19th.
Has the applicant
So
been notified?
I hope all 4 of you will be here.
That is the discussion of the first phase of community benefit.
So there's no development
Right. Yeah, you're making a
application.
recommendation to city council.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about the next week? So we have, on the 24th, we have our combined meeting with the planning board, with the city council, and then I have us meeting also on the 26th.
That was canceled.
That was canceled. So when will we,
That same night as the 24th.
so we could be here all
Very
night
late.
long?
When? What day could we be?
So what's happening? It's a Tuesday.
Let me explain.
Yeah, tell us about 24th.
What's happening on the 24th is you're first having a joint meeting with City Council to discuss Alpine Balsam. And then once your joint discussion is done with City Council, Planning Board will stay here and you will make your recommendation.
But it's a public hearing, correct?
It is
So-
a public hearing.
Okay.
And
It'll be
we're
public
doing that
comment.
because on the 26th, we have too many people gone, too many absentees on the 26th. So this was the best solution, to
Yeah,
have
we talked
one
about
night on the 24th. So it will be a long evening.
Okay,
Great, I'm flying back in time for it. I don't want to miss this one.
good.
And then our next meeting is the 3rd of October?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other calendar check items? Everybody else can make the meetings that we've just talked about? Okay, good. Anything else at all, or shall I hit the gavel?
Gavel time.
Let me just say that I can't make any of the meetings except for October 3rd, and you know that. because of my ch-
October, the week of October.
Sorry, Lupita, you're out of absences.
Okay, I'm gonna gavel us out. Good meeting, everybody. Thank you.
Good job.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Live from Paris of Pot 24.